She was 23 and homeless. No lease, no car, no place to put her winter coat, just a cracked leather purse and $4 she had folded twice after buying a bus station coffee she could not finish. And with that money, she bought a Rushlight dipping shed crouched behind Canal Road in Cuyahoga County, Ohio, a place the 1962 county survey had already left off its maps. The north wall leaned 3 inches out of plumb. Rain came through the roof in 5 separate places. The county had condemned it since 1989 and was scheduled for demolition the following spring. But what nobody knew was that inside the tallow vat, beneath a sealed iron false bottom that had not been opened in over 90 years, was something that would change her life forever. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Callie Rowe had been waiting her whole life without knowing it. She had learned waiting first in apartments where the heat clicked on late and shut off early, in the pause between a door opening downstairs and the sound of footsteps deciding whether they would pass by or climb. She learned it beside kitchen windows clouded with steam from boiling pasta, beside laundry baskets filled with clothes that had to dry across chairbacks because the coin machine in the basement ate quarters and gave nothing back. In the first years she could remember, home was never one address for long. It was a second-floor walk-up near Lorraine Avenue, then a brick duplex with ivy dead on the chimney, then a white house cut into 3 rentals where the bedroom ceiling showed the brown map of an old leak. Her mother, Marianne, kept a cigar box of rent receipts tied with a blue rubber band. She kept them as if paper could become a fence if stacked carefully enough. Callie remembered the feel of that box more than the faces of most landlords, the little metal clasp, the cedar smell under the tobacco ghost, the way her mother slid every receipt inside and pressed it flat with 2 fingers. Callie was not a loud child. She watched before she asked. She could sit at a Formica table with a blunt pencil and the back of a grocery circular, drawing houses with chimneys that did not smoke and doors that did not stick. On Sundays, when other families seemed to move in whole clusters toward church doors or restaurant booths, she and her mother often walked to the laundromat carrying bags against their hips. The machines turned and turned. The windows sweated. The whole place smelled of soap, damp denim, and somebody's fried onions brought in a covered dish. Her father had become mostly weather in the room, a pressure people mentioned without naming. He had left before her first school picture and sent cards for 3 birthdays, each one signed in the same slanted hand, each one late by enough days to teach her not to stand near the mailbox. Marianne did not curse him. She did not bless him either. She folded those cards into the rent box and closed the clasp. For a while, Marianne tried to be both shelter and gate. She worked at a clinic desk, then at a nursing home, then at the counter of a dry cleaner where the chemical smell followed her into the evenings and lived in the seams of her uniform. She could be tender in sudden practical ways. She warmed Callie's socks on the oven door in February. She cut apples into thin half-moons and salted them because that was what her own mother had done. She hummed hymns without words while mending buttons onto thrift store blouses, yet she carried a kind of inward accounting that never let any kindness remain free. Every hour of work had to be weighed against the electric bill. Every favor had a hook in it somewhere. When Callie was 10, Marianne married Leon Pritchard, a man who owned 3 rental houses and wore dress shoes even on Saturdays. He had a careful mustache, a careful watch, and a way of setting his keys on the kitchen counter that made everyone hear ownership. He did not shout at first. He did not need to. His silence had corners. He looked at chipped plates, unpaid bills, and Callie's school shoes as if they were evidence laid before a judge. In those years, the one steady road in Callie's life led west on weekends to her grandfather's shed. Elias Rowe lived beyond the last grocery stores and traffic lights, in a narrow house outside Medina, where the yard sank toward a marshy strip of cattails. He had been a millwright, a mender of gates, a maker of rushlights when nobody asked for them anymore. He was Marianne's father, though Marianne spoke to him as if the fact itself had become inconvenient. His hands were broad with nails permanently darkened from iron and lampblack, and he smelled of wool, coffee, beeswax, and the cold breath of unheated rooms. Every other Saturday when Marianne's work schedule and Leon's temper allowed it, Callie was dropped at his lane before 9. Her grandfather would be waiting by the mailbox in a canvas coat shiny at the elbows. He never waved broadly. He lifted 2 fingers from his side, exact and calm, and Callie would step out of the car with a paper sack of clothes and the private relief of having arrived where objects stayed where they were put. His shed stood behind the house beneath a walnut tree. It was not large, but to Callie, it contained a whole weather system of patience. Bundles of dried rushes hung from rafters. A shallow iron pan sat blackened on a brick stand. There were crocks of rendered tallow, beeswax wrapped in cloth, old knives, snuff tins full of wick trimmings. A ledger with columns so neat they seemed ruled by breath. Elias taught her how to strip the pith from common rush, how to leave enough green skin to hold a spine, how to warm fat until it received without scorching. He showed her how a rushlight was not a candle and not a torch, but a modest promise between darkness and hand. The ritual never changed much, which was its mercy. First they would drink weak coffee and milk at the kitchen table while he read the farm notices in the county paper. Then they would walk to the marsh edge and cut only what he called the willing stems, the ones high enough, firm enough, dry enough at the tip. He would make her feel each one before the knife touched it. The thumb knew first, the eye came later. Back in the shed, he set a kettle on the stove and let the chill loosen from the corners. Callie would sit on an upturned crate and watch steam rise from his sleeves. He never hurried the dipping. The tallow had to be warm, not angry. A strip of rush had to be lowered and lifted in one slow breath, then rested across a rack until the shine dulled. Too much fat made a smoky light, too little made a weak one. He let her ruin dozens. He kept each failed length on a nail near the door, so she could see the record of trying without shame. Elias had names for small acts. Trimming was correction, drying was listening, dipping was trust. When he wrapped finished rushlights in brown paper, he tied them with twine pulled from a coffee can and wrote the date in pencil. Nobody bought many. A historical society ordered some once. A pastor wanted a dozen for Christmas Eve. A woman from Akron bought 2 bundles after saying they reminded her of a museum in Pennsylvania. Elias accepted each little sale as if it were enough. One November afternoon, when Callie's hands were chapped and the first ice had gathered along the ditch, she asked why he kept doing a thing that the world no longer needed. Elias lowered a rush into the pan, lifted it, and held it still until the first drop fell back. The slow work keeps what hurry throws away. He said it once without turning it into a lesson. Its meaning came to her gradually through seasons and losses, the way smoke darkens a ceiling beam by living there. He meant that patient labor did not merely produce an object. It preserved attention. It kept memory from being swept into the ditch with peelings, ashes, and rainwater. It allowed a person to remain honest in a country that often praised speed and called it virtue. When Elias died, Callie was 16 and the marsh was under March water. He had gone into the hospital in Cleveland for what Marianne first called tests and then complications and then God's will, though she said the last 2 words without much confidence. Callie saw him only once after the ambulance took him. His hands lay on the blanket as if waiting for work somebody had forgotten to bring. He asked whether the walnut had dropped its last husks. She said yes, though she did not know. He nodded, accepting the answer for her sake. After the funeral, the house was emptied with a speed that made every drawer seem accused. Marianne wanted the matter settled. Leon knew a man who bought tools by the lot. Boxes went onto a truck before Callie could read the labels. The ledger disappeared. The rushes were thrown out because mice had found them. The iron dipping pan was sold with stove parts and hinge iron. Elias's canvas coat, still holding the shape of his shoulders, was folded into a black trash bag that split on the porch step. Callie saved only what fit under her sweater: a short stripping knife with a walnut handle, a folded square of brown paper with his handwriting on it, 3 rushlights tied together, never burned. She kept them in a shoebox through every room after that. Through graduation, through 2 community college semesters she could not afford to finish, through jobs at a pharmacy register, a motel laundry, and a bakery where she learned to lift sheet pans without blistering her wrists. Leon grew more exact with age. His houses gave him a posture of usefulness, but little mercy came from him. He collected keys and grudges. He taped notes to the refrigerator in block letters about lights left on, milk used, dishes soaking. The house where Callie and Marianne lived after Elias died belonged to him before the marriage, and he let that fact sit under every conversation like a stone under a thin rug. He did not strike walls. He did not threaten in ways a person could photograph. He simply made the air expensive. If Callie came home late from closing at the bakery, he would be seated in the front room with the TV muted, his shoes still on, one hand resting near the remote. If she bought shampoo without asking, he would leave the receipt on the table with the tax circled in red. When she began saving money in a jar behind the linen closet, the jar vanished and returned empty, washed clean, as if cleanliness could erase theft. Marianne became quieter beside him. She answered questions by looking toward the sink. She moved through rooms as if any sudden sound might cost extra. There were evenings when Callie saw the mother she remembered, the woman who warmed socks and cut apples thin, but those glimpses came like birds landing on a fence and leaving before the eye could trust them. By 23, Callie was sleeping in the back room of Leon's house under a ceiling fan that clicked once each turn. Her belongings had narrowed to 2 plastic bins, a suitcase with one broken wheel, the shoebox of her grandfather's things, and a winter coat she had bought from a church basement sale. She paid what Leon called board, though he never wrote it down. She bought groceries that others ate. She scrubbed the bathroom on Thursdays and kept her shampoo in her purse. The eviction came on October 17th, 222. A Monday of cold rain and leaf paste on the sidewalks. Callie had worked the early shift at the bakery, where the ovens fogged her glasses and cinnamon stuck to her cuffs. When she reached the house, her suitcase stood on the porch under the weak overhang. One plastic bin sat beside it with a towel over the top. The shoebox rested on the lid, dry because somebody had put it inside a grocery bag. That small care hurt more than roughness would have. Leon opened the door only as far as the chain allowed. Behind him. The hallway lamp was on, though the afternoon was not yet dark. Marianne stood near the stairs with both hands closed around a dish towel. Her face had the drained look of a woman listening to water run somewhere behind a wall. Leon held a folded paper between 2 fingers. It was not a legal notice. It was a page torn from a yellow pad, written in his squared hand. "You can take 1 bag and go now." 8 words. No raised voice. No explanation that could be answered. Callie looked past him to her mother. Marianne's lips parted, but no sound came. She did not step forward. She did not reach for the chain. Her right hand moved once, rubbing the towel between finger and thumb, and then stopped. The silence settled itself. It had a place at the table now. Callie picked up the shoebox first. The rain had begun to wet the side of the suitcase, and one corner of the cardboard bin sagged where the towel did not cover it. She wanted her work shoes from the back room, the blue mug from the dish rack, the framed picture of Elias standing beside the walnut tree. She wanted the rent receipts not because they would help her, but because they would prove some history of trying. Leon closed the door before she could ask. The chain slid back into place with a small, final sound. For 6 weeks she moved through northern Ohio as if the whole region had become a waiting room. The first night she slept upright in the Greyhound station in Cleveland, her suitcase handle looped around her ankle, her coat folded over the shoebox under her arm. The fluorescent lights made every face look unfinished. A janitor pushed a yellow mop bucket past her at 3 a.m. and did not tell her to leave. That was the first mercy. By dawn she had $47.18, 2 stale rolls from work, and a phone with a cracked screen that showed 10% battery. She spent 3 nights in a church shelter on Superior Avenue, where the mattresses were thin and the women turned in their sleep like pages. She learned which radiator knocked before heat came, which volunteer poured coffee generously, which corner kept the least draft. From there she took a bus to Elyria because a diner had posted a dishwashing job, but the manager wanted someone with an address. She wrote her name anyway on the application and left the phone number of the shelter, though she knew no one would find her there. In Lorraine she slept one night behind a closed laundromat between the building and a fence, wrapped in her coat with her purse under her ribs. The air smelled of wet concrete and dryer sheets vented from machines still tumbling inside. She woke before sunrise to a gull calling from a light pole and a numbness in her left hand that frightened her until movement brought pain back into the fingers. Her money became exact: $32 after a bus and soup, $24 after a thrift store sweater and a phone charge at a coffee shop where she bought the smallest tea so she could sit near an outlet, $17 after aspirin and a packet of cheese crackers, $11 after a ride to Akron with a driver who kept his gospel station low and asked no questions, $7 after the shelter laundry, $4 after the coffee at the bus station. Those weeks taught her the architecture of being unseen. Libraries opened at 10. Grocery stores had bathrooms near the front if one walked in with purpose. Hospital waiting rooms were warm but watched. Train platforms punished sleep. A person could wash her face in a sink and emerge looking almost ordinary if she had a comb, a paper towel, and enough will to stand straight. She learned to carry herself carefully, not proudly, because pride required an audience and she had none. The shoebox stayed with her. When she had to choose between clothes and it, she chose the box. She wore the same jeans 4 days in a row, rather than let go of the stripping knife, the brown paper, the 3 unburned rushlights that had outlived the hand that made them. On nights when sleep came broken, she touched the lid to be sure it remained under her coat. On the 41st day, a wet Thursday, Callie entered the main branch of the Akron-Summit County Public Library because rain had soaked through the shoulder seam of her coat. She chose a table near the local history shelves, not because she meant to read, but because the corner was warm and there was an outlet hidden behind a chair. She charged her phone, then opened the newspaper left by someone else and began scanning classifieds with the old habit of a person still pretending choice might arrive in print. Most of the listings were rooms she could not afford, cars that did not run, estate sales, snowblowers, piano lessons, firewood by the cord. Near the bottom of a county notices page, printed in cramped type, was a line so plain she almost passed it. County surplus. Non-buildable remnant parcel with condemned historic outbuilding. Former Rushlight dipping shed. Minimum bid $4. Buyer assumes removal or restoration. The words did not brighten. They did not call out. They simply waited on the page. Callie read them once, then again, moving her finger under each part. County surplus, condemned historic outbuilding, former Rushlight dipping shed. The phrase seemed impossible in the public library light among computer printers and raincoats and children whispering too loudly near the aquarium. She had not seen those words together since Elias's ledger, since the brown paper labels, since the marsh path where he lifted his knife and chose only the willing stems. The notice listed the Cuyahoga County Land Reutilization Office, a parcel number, and a deadline 2 days away. It said the purchaser would accept all liability. It said the structure had no utilities. It said demolition had been recommended. It said sealed bids must be delivered in person with cash or money order. She took the newspaper to the reference desk and asked for a photocopy. The librarian, a woman with silver hair pinned low and reading glasses on a chain, looked at Callie's wet sleeve, then at the listing, then back at Callie without asking the question her face had nearly formed. She made the copy and waved away the dime. "Keep dry." "Honey," she said. That was the second mercy. Callie sat again and laid the copy flat. She wrote the address on the back of a grocery receipt. There was no sensible path from a library table to a condemned shed in another county. She had no bank account with anything useful in it. No car, no bed waiting if she failed, no person she could call who would not ask what she had done wrong. Yet the listing had entered her like the smell of tallow warming in a pan, like a slow hand laid on the shoulder. By evening, she had decided. Not with drama, not with certainty. She decided the way a tired person decides to rise from a bench before the cold finishes entering the bones. She would spend nothing except what moved her north. She would carry the shoebox and the suitcase if the wheel held. She would arrive before the office closed, put $4 on a counter, and let the clerk tell her no, if no was what waited there. At dawn the next morning, Callie stood outside the bus station with her purse under her coat. and the photocopied notice folded into the shoebox, beside the last 3 rushlights her grandfather had made. The first bus north sighed at the curb, and she stepped toward it as if stepping onto a road that had been hidden under leaves for years. By mid-morning, the bus windows had gathered a grey film of breath and road salt, blurring the backs of warehouses into one long, tired wall. Callie sat near the rear with the suitcase wedged beneath her knees and the shoebox flat against her ribs, both arms folded over it, as if warmth could pass through cardboard and keep memory alive. Outside Cleveland, the city loosened by degrees. The brick mills gave way to storage lots, the storage lots to gas stations with burned-out signs, and then to the low winter fields that seemed to hold their breath beneath a sky the colour of a pewter spoon. The bus left her at a park-and-ride lot near Strongsville because that was as far as her fare could take her. From there, the county office was still miles away, farther than it had looked on the library computer map. She had copied the directions onto the back of the notice in careful print, but rain had softened the ink at the corners. Pearl Road North. A transfer if she could find one, then downtown, then the Land Bank office before 4. The temperature was 38 degrees when she began walking. A steady mist fell across the shoulder of the road. Not enough to be called rain by a weather report, enough to enter wool and stay there. Her suitcase wheel survived the first half-mile, clicking over gravel and cracks, then began to drag with a sound like a stiff broom. Traffic pushed cold air against her legs. A man in a county truck slowed once, looked at the suitcase, then drove on. She did not blame him. A woman walking with everything she owned could look like trouble from a distance. She found a bus stop outside a closed carpet store and stood beneath the narrow shelter with a grocery bag full of plastic bottles moving in the wind beside her. The schedule had been scratched and sun-faded until only the route number remained. 20 minutes passed, then 40. A bus came at last, exhaling heat and diesel, and the driver waited while she lifted the suitcase up the steps with both hands. Downtown Cleveland appeared not as a destination but as a stack of wet stone, glass and courthouse roofs shining under the dull noon light. She stepped off near a plaza where pigeons walked with the grave importance of little officials. She had 50 minutes before she needed to be in the right building, and the office address was still 7 blocks away. She bought nothing. She ate one broken cheese cracker from the bottom of her purse and let it soften on her tongue. At a public restroom in the county building, she washed her hands, combed her damp hair with her fingers, and changed her socks in a stall, balancing one foot on the toe of the other shoe so the clean sock would not touch the floor. Her toes had wrinkled pale from wet cotton. She pressed the old socks flat between paper towels and put them in the outside pocket of her suitcase. The county land office occupied the 3rd floor of a building that had once been handsome and now endured fluorescent light with resignation. The lobby held a security desk, a metal detector, and a potted ficus with dust collected along the leaves. A deputy glanced at her suitcase and asked where she was headed. She showed the photocopied notice. He read the top line, looked at her face, and pointed toward the elevators. 3rd floor, window 6. His voice was neither kind nor unkind. That was enough. The elevator smelled of wet coats and brass polish. When the doors opened, she found a long corridor lined with county maps framed behind glass, each one showing parcels in pink, yellow, blue, and green. Places became rectangles there. Creeks became thin blue threads. Roads ran straight through neighborhoods where no road ever felt straight to a person walking it. At the end of the hall, a sign read Land Reutilization and Surplus Permit in black letters that had begun to peel at the corners. Inside, the room was warmer than the corridor and held the papery hush of records. Metal filing cabinets stood in rows behind the counter. A copy machine clicked somewhere behind a partition. 4 plastic chairs lined the wall beneath posters about lead paint, floodplain permits, and vacant structure compliance. A man in a work jacket signed a form with a ballpoint pen chained to the counter. An older couple whispered over a tax map. Nobody looked up for long. Window 6 was closed. Callie stood there anyway. Behind the glass partition, a woman in a brown cardigan finished typing something into a computer, removed her glasses, and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Her hair was iron grey, cut blunt below the chin, and her face had the composed weariness of someone who had spent years telling people what paper would and would not allow. A narrow nameplate sat beside her monitor. MRS. Nora K. Klein, Surplus Parcel Clerk. After another minute, Mrs. Klein slid the glass window open. Help you? Callie placed the photocopied notice on the counter and smoothed it once with her palm. I came to submit a bid for this parcel. Ma'am, Mrs. Klein did not touch the paper at first. She leaned forward, read the parcel number, and let out a breath so quiet it barely moved her lips. Then she pulled the notice toward herself and turned to the computer. Her fingers moved across the keys with a dry, exact tapping. This one, she said. Callie waited. The clerk printed a sheet, walked to a cabinet, opened a drawer, and removed a thin file with a red sticker on the tab. She brought it back and laid it flat, but did not open it. Her eyes lifted to Callie's coat, the suitcase, the purse held tight under one elbow, the shoebox wrapped in a grocery bag. You understand this is not a house. Yes, ma'am. It has no water service. Yes, ma'am. No active electric. Yes, ma'am. No certificate of occupancy. Yes, ma'am. The condemnation remains attached until inspection, repair, or removal. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Klein opened the file. Inside were photographs clipped to a report, the images grainy from a county camera, a sagging roof, boards silvered with weather, a chimney missing several courses, a sign so faded it looked more like an injury to the wood than lettering. The clerk turned the pages slowly, as if giving Callie time to withdraw. There is suspected lead paint, probable animal intrusion, moisture damage, possible structural compromise on the north wall. The parcel itself is narrow and not eligible for new construction under current zoning. You understand? Yes, ma'am. The buyer assumes all liability from the date of transfer. Yes, ma'am. If demolition is required, the cost may exceed the value of the parcel. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Klein looked at her for a long moment. The copy machine stopped, leaving the room so hushed that Callie could hear the older man at window 3 clearing his throat. Do you have proof of funds? Callie opened her purse. The 4 bills had grown soft from being folded and unfolded. She placed them on the counter, smoothing each one with 2 fingers. They looked almost childish beneath the fluorescent light. The clerk's expression changed by a measure too narrow to name. Not pity. Not yet respect. Something more careful than either. Minimum bid is cash only. You know that part? Yes, ma'am. And if no other bid has been submitted, the county may accept it. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Klein closed the file and stood. Wait here. She took the bills, the notice, and the red-stickered folder into a back office. Through the glass, Callie saw her speak to a man in shirt sleeves. He looked through the folder, then toward the window, then back at the folder. A second woman entered, checked a stamp on a document, and left. Time lengthened in that county office, not grandly, but in little administrative pieces. A printer warming, a cabinet drawer opening, a phone ringing twice and being answered. The smell of toner and damp wool. Callie kept one hand on the shoebox. Her stomach had become a small cold room of its own. Mrs. Klein returned with 3 forms and a receipt book. No competing bids were filed, she said. The county can process transfer under surplus remnant disposal. She slid the first form forward and set a pen beside it. Print your legal name here. Mailing address, if any. Here. Callie paused over that second line. Mrs. Klein saw the pause. She opened a drawer, removed a smaller form, and placed it on top. Temporary mailing designation. You can use general delivery for 30 days. Post office downtown or nearest town branch. That will satisfy the field. Thank you. Ma'am? The clerk nodded once, as if gratitude had to be kept modest to remain usable. Callie filled the forms slowly, each letter of her name steadier than her hand felt. She signed where arrows indicated. She initialed the liability notice, the no utilities acknowledgement, the condemnation disclosure, the assumption of code compliance. Mrs. Klein reviewed every page, then pulled a brass stamp from beside the register. It had a worn black handle and a heavy square base. She inked the county seal, aligned it over the deed transfer receipt, and pressed down with both hands. The sound was blunt and final. A place had moved. Mrs. Klein tore out the receipt and placed it under the glass. Then she reached into the folder and removed a photocopied tax map with a narrow strip circled in blue. "Take Canal Road east out of town," she said. "The public right-of-way ends before the old mill race. You walk past that, but keep left of the ditch. There is a gravel lane, though most people miss it. If you reach the collapsed smokehouse foundation, you have gone too far." Callie leaned in to study the map. "Bus? Only to the township line. After that? No." "How far on foot?" "From the last stop. Near 5 miles. More if you lose the lane." The clerk watched her absorb it. "Do not go after dark if you can help it." "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Klein put the remaining documents into a manila envelope and wrote the parcel number across the front. Her handwriting was slanted and firm. She hesitated before closing the clasp. "Rowe," she said. Callie looked up. "Ma'am, your surname." The clerk tapped the form once. There was a row in the older craft files. "I have seen that name." Callie did not answer immediately. The room seemed to rearrange itself around that small statement. Mrs. Klein turned to the file cabinet behind her, opened the lowest drawer, and searched through hanging folders whose tabs had yellowed at the edges. She found one marked Historic Trade Survey, 1978, and carried it to the counter. It took her a few minutes to locate the page. When she did, she adjusted her glasses and read silently. "Here," she said at last. "Elias M. Rowe, demonstrator and consultant. Rush preparation, tallow dipping, domestic lighting trades. Interviewed for the county bicentennial inventory." She looked through the glass again. More slowly this time. Relation. Callie kept her hand flat on the manila envelope. "My grandfather?" Mrs. Klein lowered her eyes to the page. The office noise went on around them, indifferent and ordinary, but the clerk's voice softened by 1 degree. "He came here once. I was new then. He brought a bundle of Rushlights wrapped in brown paper because the county display wanted examples. Would not let us call them candles. Corrected the label himself." A small pulse moved in Callie's throat. She could see him doing it. His pencil touching a printed card. His patience not allowing error to pass merely because it was convenient. Mrs. Klein closed the folder with care. "Then you know more than most who bid on things like this." "I know some," Callie said. "Some is better than none." The clerk tucked a photocopy of the old survey page into the manila envelope without comment, as though it had always belonged there. Then she took one of the 4 bills from the cash drawer, the softest one, and wrote the receipt number on a small slip clipped to it. "This stays with the bid record," she said. "County policy." Callie nodded. The dollar lay on Mrs. Klein's desk. No longer money in the usual sense, but proof that a transaction too modest for anyone to notice had taken place in full. By the time Callie left the building, the mist had thinned into a pale drizzle, and the afternoon had begun to lower itself behind the courthouse towers. She carried the manila envelope inside her coat, between her sweater and the shoebox, close enough for the paper to warm. The suitcase wheel dragged worse now. Its broken side had picked up a flat spot and knocked against the sidewalk every 4th turn. She took the bus as far as the township line, where the driver opened the doors beside a gas station, a vacant restaurant with red vinyl booths visible through the window, and a sign for bait beer and lottery tickets. From there, Canal Road ran east, 2 lanes and no shoulder. past the kind of rust-belt edges that never make postcards and never quite disappear. The town itself seemed to have grown along the road in layers of use and abandonment. There was a hardware store with a green awning faded to the color of dried sage. Next to it stood a diner called Mercy Lunch, its front window painted with coffee pie and homemade soup in careful white letters. Across the street, a laundromat blinked open though half its machines bore handwritten signs. A feed and seed store occupied a brick building with a pulley still mounted above the second-floor door. Farther down sat a funeral home in a pale yellow house, its porch light already on though the hour was not yet evening. She passed a barber pole that no longer turned, a bakery closed for the season, and a storefront church with a paper cross taped inside the glass. The sidewalks ended near the last mailbox cluster. After that, the road bent toward low ground where ditches filled with brown water and cattails stood broken from the first hard frosts. A dog began barking before she saw the house it belonged to. It was a black and tan hound behind a chain-link fence. Lean as a shadow, its voice deep enough to make the suitcase handle tremble in her grip. An older man came out onto the porch in a quilted jacket and raised one hand, not greeting exactly, more acknowledging that both she and the dog existed. "Road gets soft past the culvert," he called. "Thank you." "Keep left." She did. Walnut trees appeared in uneven rows beyond the ditch, their black branches open against the dimming sky. The ground beneath them was scattered with husks gone dark and soft, the smell sharp and bitter where her shoes crushed them. A pair of crows lifted from a fence post and moved toward the river, their wings steady, their voices brief. Canal Road narrowed near the old mill race. The pavement crumbled at the edges, then gave way to gravel. She stopped twice to check the map, turning it to match the ditch, the bend, the place where an overgrown lane should have been. At first she missed it. The entrance looked like a break in the brush, no wider than a farm gate, with sumac and wild grape leaning inward. Only when she moved closer did she see two worn ruts under the leaves. The suitcase could not roll there. She lifted it and carried it against her thigh, walking awkwardly, stopping every dozen yards to shift the weight. Thorn canes caught at the hem of her coat. Water shone in the ruts. Once her right shoe sank above the sole and came free with a sucking sound. The air grew colder under the trees. It smelled of wet bark, iron water, and something mineral rising from old stone. Then the lane opened. The shed stood at the edge of a shallow clearing, half turned away from the road as if it had grown used to being overlooked. It was longer than it had seemed in the county photograph, roughly 24 feet by 30, with a steep roof sagging along the middle and cedar shingles lifted like fish scales on the north side. Weathered oak boards ran vertically along the walls, grey and black where rain had worked on them for decades. The foundation was fieldstone, irregular but stubborn, with moss filling the joints. A square brick chimney rose from the back room, its upper courses broken, its shoulders streaked white from old moisture. The north wall did lean. Mrs. Klein's report had not lied. The door sat crooked in its frame, with a hasp rusted open and a padlock missing. A broken clay crock lay beside the step, filled with leaves. One window held 3 panes, another held none, and the back corner had been patched at some point with tin that had gone the colour of dried blood. Callie stood before it long enough for the cold to settle through her wet socks. She did not feel triumph. The place was too wounded for that, nor did she feel disappointment, because disappointment belonged to people who had been promised something. What stood before her was not shelter in any proper sense, not yet. It was a burden with walls. It was proof that the county had been willing to sell a problem to anyone who arrived with the exact cash and a signature. Still, when she touched the door, the wood held firm beneath her palm. She pushed. The lower edge scraped over grit, then gave with a groan that seemed to come from deep in the hinges. A smell came out first: dust, cold ashes, old fat, mouse nest, damp wood, and the faint sweet rot of leaves blown in and trapped. She covered her mouth with her sleeve and waited until the air moved enough to enter. The front room had a plank floor bowed but present. A workbench ran along the east wall beneath the window openings. Above it hung empty pegs, dark where tools had once shielded the wood from smoke and sun. A narrow shelf held glass jars clouded white from age, a bent funnel, a cracked saucer, and a single spool of blackened twine. In the corner stood a chair with no seat. The ceiling beams were low, hand-hewn, and furred with cobwebs that stirred when the door opened wider. The light from outside entered in flat strips. Dust rose around her boots. Somewhere in the wall, something small moved and stopped. She set the suitcase inside, then the shoebox on the bench. The sound of cardboard touching wood seemed too intimate for such a ruined place, as if she had introduced one memory to another without permission. She opened the manila envelope and removed the tax map, the deed receipt, and the copied survey page. Elias's name looked strange under county letterhead, both official and alive. She folded the page again and placed it in the shoebox under the 3 rushlights. The back room was colder. It had been the working room. She knew that before she understood why. The floor changed there. Not planks, but broad stone flags set unevenly, their seams packed with dust and straw. A brick hearth occupied the south wall beneath the damaged chimney, with an iron crane still fixed into the masonry. Beside it stood a long, shallow trough of blackened metal, supported on 2 stone piers. At first she thought it was a rendering pan. Then she saw the depth of it, the heavy rim. The fitted iron lid leaned against the wall behind the tallow vat. She did not approach it at once. Some objects announced themselves by usefulness, others by waiting. The vat gathered the last light in its dark surface and gave none back. Dried leaves had drifted against its base. A raccoon print marked the dust along one rim. The whole room seemed to hold a colder silence around it. Callie turned away because night was arriving and survival had requirements before wonder. She checked the windows for wind, pushing loose boards across the widest openings and wedging them with stones. She dragged the broken chair against the door because the hasp would not hold. She found an old broom with half its bristles gone and swept a clear place along the interior wall where the roof leaked least. The broom lifted dust more than it removed it, and soon her throat burned. She tied her scarf over her mouth and kept working. By full dark, the room had become a set of shapes: bench, door, suitcase, shoebox. Window holes pale with clouded moonlight. She put on every layer she owned, including the thrift store sweater still damp at the cuffs, and spread her towel on the plank floor. Her coat became a blanket. Her purse became a pillow. The shoebox she kept against her stomach, one arm over it. Cold came up through the floor in steady, honest waves. It entered her hips first, then her shoulders, then the spaces between her fingers. The building spoke in small noises, water ticking into a pan somewhere, wind fingering the lifted shingles, a dry scrape inside the wall, the long settling sigh of a beam remembering weight. Outside, the hound barked twice far away and stopped. A train moved somewhere beyond the road, low and distant, its horn softened by trees. She did not sleep for a long time. Instead, she listened to the shed and tried to learn which sounds belonged to danger and which belonged to age. The distinction mattered. Age had its own language, and not every groan was a warning. Some were only the body of a place remembering weather. Near midnight, the clouds thinned enough for moonlight to enter through the broken west window. It crossed the floor in a pale rectangle and reached the leg of the workbench, where the shoebox sat above her like a small dark altar. She reached up, touched the edge of it, then lowered her hand again. No one knew where she was. No one expected her. No one was coming to take back what had been signed and stamped and handed across a county counter. That did not make the place safe. It made it hers in the narrowest legal sense. And perhaps that was the first kind of shelter the world had been willing to give. The slow work keeps what hurry throws away. At first light, Callie learned that the shed did not wake all at once. The roof brightened before the floor did. Grey seeped between the lifted shingles, touched the rafters, and slowly found the workbench, the broken chair, the jars clouded by age. The back room remained nearly black until morning had gathered enough strength to enter through the missing panes and lie along the stone flags. Her breath showed when she sat up. Her shoulder ached from the boards beneath her towel, and her fingers were stiff enough that she had to close and open them several times before they obeyed. She began the day by counting necessities. The property had no well she could use at first glance, though a round stone curb stood 50 feet behind the shed beneath a mat of vines and fallen branches. She cleared leaves with her hands until she found the fitted lid, then tested it by lifting one edge. The smell that rose was cold and mineral, not rotten, which gave her a careful kind of hope. A length of chain lay nearby, rusted into the grass. There was no bucket. The rope had long since vanished. She replaced the lid and set a flat stone on top so no animal would fall through. The outhouse stood farther back, half hidden by sumac, its door hanging by one hinge and its roof collapsed inward. She did not enter it. She stood outside and looked long enough to understand that some parts of the property belonged to later work, not the first morning. For now, the gas station 2 miles back would serve if she planned carefully. So would the public library, if she could reach town before closing. Survival, like craft, had measurements. The first 3 days passed in cold errands and narrow victories. She learned the floor's creaks by walking without shoes, placing her weight slowly until each plank gave its report. The third board inside the door complained sharply. The wide board near the workbench dipped but held. The back threshold was proud on the right side and would catch her toe if she forgot. At night she moved by memory, one hand along the wall, not trusting the dark but not fearing every inch of it either. She carried water in 2 plastic gallon jugs bought after returning empty bottles for deposit. The first time she filled them in the gas station bathroom. The young clerk looked at her through the open door and then looked away. She took that as permission. She washed with a bandana and cold water behind the shed before sunrise, gasping when it struck her neck. She brushed her teeth at the edge of the ditch and buried food scraps beneath a stone so raccoons would not learn her too quickly. She did not light a fire. Not yet. The chimney had to be examined first, and she knew enough from Elias to fear warmth drawn through a neglected flue. Fire was not comfort until a person had earned it. Fire asked whether mortar held, whether creosote had gathered, whether birds had nested in darkness, whether the damper opened or froze in place. The old hearth waited with its black mouth. She waited too. On the 3rd afternoon after waking from a shallow sleep with numb feet and a throat raw from dust, Callie walked into town with the manila envelope under her coat. The sky had cleared, leaving the cold sharper. Thin ice skinned the roadside puddles, and the walnut husks had hardened enough to crack under her shoes. She carried the stripping knife in her pocket, not as weapon but as inheritance, a small weight that reminded her hands of another room. The hardware store stood between Mercy Lunch and the Feed and Seed, its green awning rattling whenever wind came down the street. The sign over the door read Bartell Hardware and Stove in white letters, some repainted, some faded. A bell rang when she entered, a real bell mounted above the frame, giving one honest note. Inside, the store smelled of mineral spirits, leather gloves, oiled metal, seed packets, dust, and wood heat from a stove near the back. Narrow aisles held bins of nails sorted by size, glass jars of brass screws, lengths of rope hanging from hooks, black stovepipe sections, mouse traps, lamp chimneys, hinges, putty knives, tar paper axes, broom handles, kettle lids, and a rack of hand-lettered cards that read cash preferred, ask before cutting chain, and no returns on kerosene. The floorboards were worn into shallow paths where generations of boots had asked the same questions. Behind the counter stood a man in his late 60s. Though weather and work had made his age difficult to measure, he was broad through the shoulders, with white hair cut close, a nose broken some time long ago, and eyebrows so heavy they seemed to cast shade over his eyes. His blue flannel shirt was mended at one cuff with black thread. A yellow pencil rested above his ear. He looked at Callie, then at her damp coat, then at the envelope. "'Smorning. What are you fixing?" It was the first question anyone had asked her that assumed repair instead of trouble. She placed the county map on the counter and pointed to the circled parcel. "I bought this shed. The one off Canal Road." The man did not laugh. He leaned over the map and whistled once through his teeth. Not loudly. "That place." "Yes." "You planning to tear it down?" "No, sir." He studied her face, and she held still under the assessment. Men who owned counters often made decisions before speaking. This one took longer. "I am Warren Bartell," he said. "My father kept that account when it was still an account." Callie touched the edge of the paper. "The shed had an account here. Long before my time, tallow, wick cotton, stovepipe, lime. Folks bought less then, repaired more." He turned toward a shelf behind him and pulled down a ledger, not the current one, but not ancient either. "I moved the old books to the back after the roof leak in '96. Might still have the older name written somewhere. I do not have much money." "Did I ask for much?" She closed her mouth. Warren opened the ledger to a blank page and wrote her name at the top before she could decide whether to refuse. "I cannot carry a large balance," she said. "Then do not make a large one. I might not be able to pay quickly. Most people cannot." That is why pencil was invented. He wrote Canal Road Shed beneath her name and underlined it once. "I will need a bucket," she said, "and a chimney brush if you rent one. Gloves if they are cheap. Maybe a flashlight. Need and maybe are different shelves." His voice was dry, but not sharp. Callie opened her purse and laid out the few coins she had, along with the receipt from the county office, though it was not money. Warren did not touch the coins. He reached beneath the counter and brought up a paper booklet with a blue cover softened from handling. "Old house repairs for owners who still have more time than money," he read from the front, printed by the extension office back when they believed people could learn something. Pages missing near the plumbing chapter. "You can have it. I cannot just take it. You can if I put it in your hand." He did. The booklet was damp along one corner and smelled faintly of mildew, but inside were drawings of rafters, flashing sash cords, plaster keys, chimney caps, mortar joints. Someone had written notes in the margins in a tight hand. Not every page belonged to her present need, but the whole book felt like a ladder, lowered into a narrow place. Warren then began making a list on brown wrapping paper. "Chimney first," he said. "Then roof leaks. Then water. Do not sleep under rot if you can help it." He selected items with the deliberate economy of someone who disliked both waste and false savings. A used galvanized bucket with a dent near the bottom, 75 cents. 2 pairs of cotton work gloves, $1.20 for the cheaper pair, but he set down the thicker pair at the same price without remark. A rented 6-inch chimney brush, $2 per day. Deposit waived in pencil. 3 flexible rods, $1 each to rent. A small wire hand brush, 49 cents. Dust masks, 3 for 30 cents. A flashlight with a cracked casing, 75 cents because the switch stuck. 2D batteries from an opened pack, 40 cents each. A pound of 8-penny nails, 62 cents. A roll of black tape, 29 cents. 1 bar of lye soap, 18 cents. A packet of picture wire, because he said it served where twine lied, 22 cents. He wrote each price down, then added them, subtracted something without explaining, and turned the paper toward her. $6.10 on account. Callie stared at the total. "I do not have that. I heard you the first time. I can pay when I find work. You will find work faster if the chimney does not burn the roof over your head." He slid the bundle across the counter. She touched the gloves first. "Thank you. Bring the brush back clean." "Yes. And do not go up on that roof alone." She looked at him then. "I was not planning to today." "That is not the same as not planning." He tore the brown paper list in half, gave her 1 copy, skepped the other under her account page, and pointed toward the door with his pencil. "Mercy Lunch gives soup after 2 if you ask Doris whether there are heel ends." The bell gave its single note when she left. The chimney took most of the 4th day. Callie began by clearing the hearth. She removed leaves, mouse droppings, fallen mortar, 2 bird bones as fine as sewing needles, and a wad of old nest made from straw, horsehair, and something that might once have been newspaper. She wore the dust mask and tied her scarf over it. Even so, soot entered the edges and left a bitter taste in her mouth. The damper had rusted half open. She worked it with the wire brush and the handle of the stripping knife, tapping rather than forcing, until flakes fell into the firebox and the hinge shifted with a reluctant scrape. She laid the iron crane aside, then used the flashlight to look up the flue. The beam found rough brick, black glaze, and a blockage near the upper turn where twigs had gathered. She went outside and studied the chimney from the ground. The missing top courses troubled her, but the shaft below seemed straight enough. She would not climb yet. Warren's warning had entered her as practical law. Instead, she worked from below, assembling the brush rod by rod, pushing upward until resistance met her hands. The first thrust dislodged soot in a soft black rain. She stepped back, coughing while it fell into the firebox, dense and shining in places. The creosote hardened into scales like burned sugar. The smell was sharp, tarry and deep, a smell of old fires that had never quite left. She waited for the air to clear, then pushed again. Up, twist, pull. Up, twist, pull. Each time the brush scraped brick, with a sound like a stiff broom on stone. Each time more black matter came down. The blockage held for nearly an hour. Her shoulders burned. Her fingers cramped inside the gloves, twice the rods unscrewed, and she had to withdraw them carefully, wiping each coupling with a rag before tightening again. She learned the amount of pressure the old flue would accept. Too little did nothing. Too much bowed the rods and threatened to wedge them. The work required patience, not as virtue but as method. Near noon, the nest gave way. Twigs, straw, soot, feathers, and one small perfect acorn dropped into the hearth in a single filthy collapse. Above it, air moved. She felt it before she saw anything, a faint downward change against her cheek, then an upward pull when wind crossed the broken chimney top. The building seemed to breathe through a long-clogged throat. She kept cleaning until the brush came down with less black clinging to it. Then she scraped the smoke shelf by hand, filled the bucket twice with debris, and carried it outside to a shallow pit behind the shed. She worked from 8 in the morning until nearly 4, stopping only to drink water and eat a heel of bread Doris had given her wrapped in wax paper after setting a bowl of soup near the diner register without asking for payment. When Callie returned the brush the next morning, clean enough that Warren ran one thumb over the bristles and nodded. She added a used stovepipe thermometer to her account and told her not to argue. "Keep the first fire small," he said.
How small?
Smaller than pride. That evening, after checking the damper again and clearing a circle on the stone floor, Callie built a fire of pencil-thin sticks gathered from beneath the walnut trees. She laid them over twists of newspaper from the county file copy, not the page with Elias's name, but an old permit notice Warren had used as packing. Her hands trembled once when she struck the match. She cupped the flame and fed it slowly. The paper caught. The twigs hesitated, darkened, then accepted. Smoke entered the room for the first minute, thin and mean, and she nearly scattered the fire in alarm. Then the flue warmed. The smoke lifted, found the throat and moved upward. The little flames straightened. The stovepipe thermometer, set beside the hearth though there was no pipe yet to mount it on, remained useless but companionable. She burned only enough to test the drawer. Then she set a dented saucepan on a flat stone near the coals and warmed water with oat salt and the last spoonful of peanut butter she had carried since Akron. The meal thickened slowly. It tasted of smoke and metal and the mercy of heat. She ate sitting on the floor with the bowl in both hands, letting the steam touch her face. That was the first hot meal the shed allowed. After that, the workroom began to reveal itself not as ruin alone, but as a place interrupted. Callie spent the next 2 days inventorying without moving more than necessary. She tore pages from the back of the repair booklet where a plumbing diagram had already been ruined and made columns the way Elias had taught her. Object? Condition. Use? Keep. Question. On the east wall above the shallow shelves, she found 4 wooden drying racks folded flat on iron hinges. Their dowels smoked dark but intact. Beneath the bench were 2 stone weights, a cracked crock sealed with wax that contained nothing but dust, and a coil of wire gone brittle with rust. In the corner nearest the hearth stood a 3-legged stool with one leg shortened by wear and repaired with a strip of tin. A wooden paddle hung from a peg, its handle polished by hands and its blade darkened from dipping. She marked it keep. There were bundles of rush stems too old to trust, wrapped in linen and tied with string that broke when touched. She did not throw them away. Not yet. Their pith had collapsed, but they had information in them: length, binding method, the angle of cut. She laid them on the bench as if they were witnesses. A small drawer beneath the work surface held stub ends of rushlights, wick cotton, 2 bent awls, a thimble, and a little paper envelope labelled salt in fading ink. She opened it and found white grains hardened into a single lump. On another shelf sat 3 books damaged by damp, an almanac from 1911, a Methodist hymnal with pressed fern leaves inside, and a receipt book whose pages had fused along one edge. She separated what she could with the stripping knife and stopped when the paper resisted. The tallow vat she left for last. It occupied the back wall with a gravity that made other objects seem arranged around it. The vat was wider than her outstretched arms and set into a brick base with a firebox beneath, though the firebox door had rusted shut. Its lid was iron-heavy and pitted, leaned upright behind it rather than fitted in place. Dust lay inside the rim. At the bottom, beneath leaves and hardened residue, was a dark surface she first took for old tallow. She cleaned around it before touching anything within it. She swept the stone flags, she cleared the brick base. She loosened the firebox door with oil Warren had given her in a cough syrup bottle and opened it just enough to see ashes packed hard inside. She removed them with a broken tin cup, finding nails, charcoal, and a button burned white. Only then did she reach into the vat. The old residue was not deep. A crust had formed along the sides, but the center surface sounded wrong when she tapped it with the wooden paddle. Not dull like fat. Not hollow like thin metal either. It gave a muted, deliberate note, as if something beneath had answered through a closed mouth. She tapped again, moving inch by inch. At the near end the sound was ordinary iron. Along the left side, ordinary, near the middle, the note changed. Lower and tighter, she pressed with both hands. Nothing shifted. She scraped the surface with the wire brush, revealing not hardened tallow but a cedar disc darkened with oil and age, cut to fit within the iron bottom so neatly that soot had hidden its seam. Her pulse changed, but her hands did not hurry. She cleared the edge with the stripping knife. Cedar, not oak, not pine cedar, chosen because insects disliked it and damp forgave it more than other woods. The disc had no visible handle, only 2 small holes set 4 inches apart near the center, plugged with wax. She picked out the wax with the tip of the knife and threaded picture wire through both holes, twisting the ends together. It did not lift. She stopped, sat back, and studied it. Weight held it down, or age had sealed it. She tapped the perimeter and listened. The right side answered with the faintest looseness. She worked there first, easing the knife along the seam, not prying hard enough to split the wood. A smell rose, faint and resinous. The hidden breath of cedar. After decades in darkness, she poured a spoonful of warm water along the rim, waited, then tried the wire again. The disc lifted 1 fraction of an inch. That was enough to make the room alter. Callie wedged a sliver of scrap wood under the raised edge, then worked around the circle, lifting in patient increments. The disc had swollen and settled into its seat. It did not want to leave. By the time it loosened fully, her knees ached from the stone and sweat had cooled along her back. At last, the cedar false bottom rose in both hands. Beneath it lay a cavity lined with tin. Inside were packages wrapped in oilcloth. For a long time she did not touch them. The shed was very still. Late afternoon light entered through the west window and rested on the rim of the vat. Outside, a crow called once from the walnut branches. Somewhere beneath the floorboards of the front room, a mouse resumed its careful life. Callie lifted the first package and set it on the bench. It was heavier than cloth should be. The oilcloth had hardened at the folds but remained whole. Tied with linen tape darkened by age, she did not cut the tape. She worked the knot loose with the stripping knife and her fingernails until it gave. Inside lay tools. Not many but chosen. A rush stripper with a bone handle worn smooth by fingers. a narrow dipping gauge made of brass marked with tiny incised lines, 2 small shears, a tin funnel, a hand-forged hook, a bundle of linen wick. Each piece had been oiled before hiding, and though age had marked them, neglect had not destroyed them. She laid them in a row on the workbench, the way Elias used to lay out tools before beginning from coarsest to finest, from hand to flame. The second package contained raw material, rush stems wrapped in waxed cloth, brittle but preserved well enough to show their preparation, cakes of beeswax sealed in paper, 2 cloth bags of rendered tallow hardened, nearly white, a packet labelled bayberry wax, Christmas butch, and a small muslin sack of salt. There were also instructions written on slips and tied to each bundle, the handwriting cramped, upright, and unfamiliar. The third package was a tin box. It had once held biscuits or tea or something sold in a grocery with a painted lid. The paint was mostly gone, leaving only a red border and the ghost of a woman holding wheat. It was tied twice with cord and sealed at the crossing with dark wax. A thumbprint remained in the wax, clear enough that Callie paused over it. She turned the box once in her hands. Then she set it down unopened and searched the cavity again. There was a fourth bundle tucked against the far wall of the tin-lined compartment, smaller, wrapped in brown paper rather than oilcloth. It felt soft at first, then granular. She opened it and found rolls of coins in paper sleeves, so old the ends had loosened, along with folded bills tied flat between 2 pieces of cardboard. Beneath those lay more coins in cloth bags, each bag labelled by denomination in the same upright hand. The room narrowed to the bench, the packages, and the sound of her own breathing. Callie did not count quickly. She cleared a place, washed her hands, dried them on the least dirty part of her towel, and began with the bills. There were silver certificates, worn but whole, Federal Reserve notes from several years, 10s, 5s, 1s, a few 20s folded separately. She stacked them by value and wrote each subtotal on the margin of the repair booklet. Then the coins. Mercury dimes, their winged heads dim from handling, Roosevelt dimes silver at the edges, wheat pennies dark and smooth, Buffalo nickels with dates nearly worn away, Jefferson nickels from the war years, marked by the large mint letter above Monticello, Washington quarters with a different ring when she set them down, silver speaking to wood, Walking Liberty $half, Franklin halves, 2 Morgan dollars worn on the high points, 3 peace dollars, one dated 1923, another 1925, another 1934. There were also foreign coins not counted in the total at first, a Canadian penny, a British farthing, a French coin with a hole near the edge, keepsakes perhaps, or payments accepted during lean years because money is sometimes more story than value. In the bottom of one cloth bag lay a small military medal wrapped in tissue. The ribbon had faded, but the bronze star at its center remained legible. The back bore a name she did not yet know and the year 1918. She laid it apart with both hands. It was evening before she finished. The amount came to $32,103.47. She wrote the total twice because the first time her numbers slanted. The odd cents mattered, they made the sum human. Not treasure in the storybook sense, not gold spilling through fingers, but money gathered nickel by nickel, bill by bill, through work, grief, saving, withholding, preparing. The cash had the feel of an account kept by someone who believed the future deserved exactness. Callie sat on the stool with the tin box before her and the total written on the page. Her body felt distant from her, as if it had continued working after her mind had stopped. Outside, dusk thickened. The first star appeared through the broken west window, then vanished behind moving cloud. She opened the tin box last. Inside was a handwritten journal, its cover made of black cloth rubbed grey at the corners. Beside it lay a sealed letter, folded and tied with blue thread. The journal's first page bore a title in the same upright hand, a record of rush work, domestic light, and the family served along the canal and river settlements. Beneath that was a name. Callie did not read farther. She closed the journal gently, as if closing the eyes of someone sleeping. Her hands had begun to shake, not wildly, but enough that she knew the night was not the time. Discovery had its own weather, and she had no shelter yet strong enough to stand inside all of it. She returned the tools to a clean cloth, covered the money with the oilcloth, and placed the letter and journal in the shoebox with Elias's rushlights. Then she set the shoebox on the workbench and stood looking at it until the room lost detail. She could have lit the fire again. She did not. Instead, she put on her coat, opened the crooked door, and walked out into the cold. The clearing was silvered by clouded moonlight. Frost had begun to gather on the dead grass, each blade catching what light there was. Beyond the walnut trees, the ditch carried water toward the old mill race, its surface dark and slow. She followed the sound until she reached the bank. The water moved without hurry, passing leaves, a twig, the reflection of a broken branch. It did not know what had been found. It did not alter itself for money, or names, or a sealed letter waiting on a bench. Callie stood there with her hands in her coat sleeves and watched until her breathing settled into the pace of the current. A person could be changed without being ready. Behind her, the shed remained dark, holding its tools, its coins, its journal, its unanswered hand. Before her, the water kept moving through the cold, exact as time and almost as patient. The slow work keeps what hurry throws away. As morning came with a white crust of frost along the inside edge of the window frames. Callie woke before the light had fully entered, not because she had slept well, but because the knowledge on the workbench had kept making itself known through the dark. The shoebox sat where she had left it, its cardboard sides softened from years of carrying and weather, its lid resting beneath the weight of the journal, the sealed letter, and the 3 rushlights tied in their brown paper. The fire from the night before was only ash now. The room held the flat cold that comes after a flame has gone out and taken its companionship with it. She did the practical things first because practical things had always kept her from floating away. She checked the door brace. She shook the stiffness from her hands. She stepped outside and rinsed her face with water from the jug, gasping quietly as the cold touched her skin. A flock of sparrows moved through the sumac, each bird no heavier than a folded note. She returned to the workbench, set the dented saucepan near the hearth, and warmed oatmeal over a handful of twigs. Keeping the fire modest and watched, she ate without tasting much. Only then did she take the letter. The paper was thick, yellowed but not brittle, folded into thirds and tied with blue thread gone pale at the knots. The wax seal had cracked along one edge, but held. On the outside, written in the same upright hand as the labels, were 5 words, "To the one who remains." Callie touched the letters with her thumb. They were not Elias's hand. His had leaned more, had widened on certain capitals, had pressed harder when he wrote dates. But something in this hand belonged to the same family of patience. Each word had been placed rather than merely written. Each downstroke kept its promise. She untied the thread and saved it beside the rushlights. She opened the folds along their old creases, careful not to force the paper where time had taught it to bend. The first line stood alone at the top of the page. "My dear one, whoever you are, if you have found this letter, then either the work has gone silent longer than I feared, or it has kept its silence faithfully until the right hands came. I'm writing from the back room of the dipping shed on Canal Road, in the cold month of February, while the vat cools behind me and the walnut limbs scrape the roof in a west wind. My hands are not strong today, so I will write plainly and trust that plainness may carry what ornament cannot. My name is Ruth Elinor Vale Rowe, born in 1876 near Zoar, Ohio, married in 1898 to Thomas Merrill Rowe of Cleveland, daughter of Anson Vale and Clara Whitcomb Vale, granddaughter of Miles Vale, who came west from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania in 1839 with 2 tin molds, 1 Bible, and an iron knife for splitting rush. My great-grandmother, Elspeth Vale, was said to have learned rushwork from her mother in Shropshire before the family crossed the ocean. I cannot prove all of that with paper. Some inheritances arrive by hand before they arrive by record. Last November I went into Cleveland to see Dr. Henry Alcott on Euclid Avenue after the cough began bringing blood into my handkerchief. He listened to my chest, asked after my appetite, and looked out the window longer than a doctor ought to look when good news is available. He said the trouble had settled deep. He did not call it by a frightening name at first, but I knew. Women who have buried children learn the shape of withheld words. I asked him whether I should put my affairs in order. He said, "Mrs. Rowe, I would not delay any kindness, so I'm not delaying this one." This shed was raised by my grandfather Miles in 1844, when the canal boats still brought more than flour and coal through these parts. It served farmwives, canal men, widows, church keepers, midwives, night nurses, and families who needed light enough for mending, reading scripture, tending fever, or finding the latch in winter, before kerosene became common and before electric lines made men speak as if darkness had been conquered. Rushlights were the poor person's honest lamp. They did not boast, they did not last long, they gave what they had. 4 generations worked here. Miles Vale cut rush from the marsh below the mill race and traded finished lights for eggs, salt pork, shoe repair, and sometimes only a blessing. His son Anson improved the drying racks and began keeping accounts in 1868. I still have his ledger, though the damp has taken some pages. I learned at my father's elbow and was dipping by the time I was 9. My husband Thomas married into the work and never treated it as lesser, because women knew it well. Our son Samuel learned the preparation of pith before he learned long division. My brother Edwin could judge tallow temperature by smell, though he was proud enough to pretend he used the thermometer. The day the trade closed was October 3rd, 1929. I write the date because endings deserve accuracy. That morning, Mrs. Lydell came for 2 bundles and said the new electric fixtures at the Methodist Hall made the room bright as noon. By afternoon, a county inspector came to speak of fire rules, insurance, and modern standards. He was not unkind, he was only certain. Orders had fallen for years, the farms had changed hands, young wives bought paraffin candles in boxes from town. The canal was no longer the road it had been. I finished the last paid bundle that evening and wrote "closed for lack of need" across the account page. My hand shook when I did it. More than 30 years have passed since the shed had regular work. Silence is not emptiness. Though many mistake the two, I have come here still. I have swept. I have mended what I could. I have dipped a few lights each Advent, not for sale but for remembrance. When Thomas died in 1936, I burned one beside his chair. When Samuel did not come home from the Argonne in 1918, I kept his medal wrapped in tissue because I could not keep his body. When Edwin was lost to fever after the war, I hung his apron on the peg and left it until mice made lace of it. Loss teaches a house new rooms. If you mean to begin again, do not begin with pride. Begin with the rush. Cut in late summer after 3 dry days when the stem is tall but before the pith loosens. Choose the common soft rush from wet ground, not the brittle kind from high-field edges. Split the green skin with a narrow knife and peel back 2/3, leaving 1 strip to hold the pith. Lay the prepared rushes on racks where air may pass freely. Shade is better than sun. Too much sun makes them harsh and quick to break. Dry for 7 days in warm weather, longer if the nights are wet. For dipping, render beef tallow slowly and strain it twice through linen. If you can obtain beeswax, add 1 part beeswax to 6 parts tallow for steadier burning in cold rooms. Bayberry wax may be added for scent, but sparingly 1 part in 12 or the flame grows fussy. Salt a handful to a kettle if the fat is soft. Keep the dipping bath between 138 and 146 degrees Fahrenheit. Below that, the fat clots. Above that, the pith drinks too greedily and smokes when lit. Dip once, lift in a straight line, let the shine dull, then dip again only if the rush is meant for a long evening. Ordinary work wants modest coating. Church work may take 3, but only with full drying between. Never rush the rack. A damp rushlight lies. Trim each end square. Store wrapped in brown paper. Away from mice, heat, and boastful men. You may wonder why I hid money here. Some of it came from the trade, some from eggs, sewing, boarders, and the sale of Thomas's watch after he was gone. Some from wages Samuel sent home before France took him. I saved because I believed someone might one day need a door more than a lecture. I hid the tools because tools left in open rooms are sold by people who do not know their names. I hid the journal because a craft without memory becomes decoration. Inheritance is not the same as possession. Possession says, "This is mine to spend." Inheritance asks, what was kept alive long enough to reach me, and what must I keep alive long enough to reach another? If you're hungry, eat. If you're cold, mend the roof before you admire the past. If you're afraid, do one exact task and then another. The work will not save you all at once. Honest things rarely do, but it may give your hands a reason to rise in the morning, and that is no small gift. If you are blood of mine, welcome. If you're not, welcome all the same. Work chooses by care more than by surname. There is a horseshoe nailed high in the walnut behind the shed, placed there by Miles when the first roof beam went up. Beneath that tree, Thomas asked me to marry him. Beneath that tree I buried the first rush knife I ever broke, because my father said a tool that had served should return with thanks. If the tree still stands, greet it for me. I do not know what year will find you. I do not know whether the town remains, whether the mill race carries water, whether anyone remembers that darkness was once a daily neighbour and not a failure of wiring. I know only that I have done what I can. The vat is sealed. The tools are oiled. The accounts are true. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Ruth Elinor Vale Rowe. February 19th, 19061. Callie read the letter once with both hands on the paper. Then she read it again. The second reading was slower, not because the words were difficult, but because they had begun to enter the room around her. Dr. Alcott on Euclid Avenue. The canal boats, the Methodist Hall bright as noon, Samuel in France, Edwin's apron, the exact heat of rendered tallow, the instruction not to begin with pride. Each detail seemed to take its place among the tools on the bench, until the shed no longer felt abandoned so much as interrupted by time, waiting for one careful witness. She folded the letter along its original creases. The paper knew where to bend. She did not improve it. She laid the blue thread across the top and placed the letter beside the journal, not inside it yet. Some things needed to remain separate until the hand could understand them. Her fingers rested on the signature. Ruth Elinor Vale Rowe. Not a famous name. Not a name carved into public stone. A woman who had hidden a door inside a vat and called it kindness. Callie stood because sitting had become too narrow for what the letter had opened. She put on her coat and stepped out the back door, ducking under the warped lintel. The cold struck her face cleanly. Behind the shed, the ground sloped toward the old well, then farther to the line of walnut trees. Their trunks were black with damp, their branches bare and jointed against the cloud-bright sky. She walked slowly, scanning the bark, not trusting the first thing she saw. A vine had climbed one trunk and died there. Lichen mottled another. A third had split long ago and healed around the wound in thick lips of wood. The horseshoe was higher than she expected. It had been nearly swallowed by the tree. Iron showed through bark at the crown of a raised oval, one curved edge and 3 nail heads still visible where the trunk had grown around them. She stood beneath it and looked up. Miles had placed it when the first beam went up. Thomas had asked Ruth to marry him there. A broken rush knife lay somewhere in that earth. Returned with thanks. The tree had kept all of it without speech. Callie touched the bark. It was ridged and cold, damp in the shaded cuts, dry along the raised seams. Her hand fit into one hollow as if others had rested there before her. She did not speak aloud. The place did not require that. She stood long enough for a small wind to move through the upper limbs and let several blackened walnuts drop into the leaves behind her. Back inside. The shed seemed different only because she was. She took the 3 rushlights from the shoebox. Elias had tied them in brown paper and written no date, only good pith in pencil. For years she had treated them as relics too precious to use, but the letter had made such preservation seem incomplete. A light saved forever, never finished becoming itself. She selected one. The rushlight was thin, no longer than her forearm, its coated pith slightly uneven under her fingers. The fat had aged but not spoiled. It held a faint smell of wax, dust, and the marsh beyond her grandfather's house. She found an old iron pinch holder in the first package of tools, cleaned its jaws with a rag, and set the rush at a slight angle the way Elias had shown her, so the flame could travel properly along the length. For a wick. There was nothing to prepare. The rush was itself the bearer. She placed the holder on the hearthstone, struck a match, and brought the small flame to the upper end. At first, the old rush resisted. Then it darkened, softened, and took. The flame was modest, narrow, almost shy. It did not leap. It did not fill the room. It made a little golden envelope around itself and cast a moving line of light across the hearth. The vat, the edge of the letter, the brass gauge, the bone-handled stripper. Smoke rose in a fine thread and vanished into the warming air above the hearth. Callie sat on the stone floor and watched the first of Elias's 3 rushlights burn in Ruth's shed. The generations did not appear. No ghost crossed the room. No voice entered the flame. What came instead was quieter and more durable. The sense of hands continuing through materials, of care surviving the people who first made it, of light being passed not in grand ceremonies but in instructions, saved tools, wrapped bundles, and one unspent tenderness hidden where no careless person would look. She thought of the people who had not had to help her and had the janitor in the Cleveland bus station pushing his yellow mop bucket past her at 3 a.m, saying nothing and letting her sleep. The librarian in Akron, silver hair pinned low, who made the copy and waved away the dime. Mrs. Klein behind county glass adding Elias's survey page to the envelope as if paperwork could carry blessing when handled correctly. Warren Bartle writing her name in pencil under an account he had no reason to trust. Doris at Mercy Lunch, setting soup near the register and pretending heel ends required no payment. None of them had changed her life in the way stories often demand. They had not rescued her. They had not declared belief. They had simply left one narrow plank across a ditch, and after enough planks, a person could cross. And maybe you know that kind of kindness too, not the grand kind people photograph, but the small one that arrives when you're too tired to ask properly. A ride offered without questions, a meal set aside, a bill paid quietly, a door left unlocked long enough for you to step inside. If someone once gave you a mercy that looked ordinary to everyone else, remember it for a moment now. Write it down if you need to. Speak their name if you can. The world is kept by such things more often than we admit. The rushlight burned lower. Callie adjusted the angle once, the way Elias had taught her, and the flame steadied again. When it finally went out, it left a red bead at the end of the pith, then a thin smoke that curled once and disappeared. The room returned to grey, but not to emptiness. That night she did not put the letter back into hiding. She wrapped the tools in clean cloth and placed them beside her sleeping place. The journal lay beneath her folded sweater, raised from the floor by the repair booklet so damp would not find it. The money went back into the vat cavity for the night, covered with oilcloth and the cedar disc, but not sealed. The military medal she kept near the rushlight holder, still wrapped in tissue because it seemed wrong to leave it alone. She lay on the plank floor with her coat over her knees and Ruth's words folded inside the shoebox beside her. The cold remained. The roof still leaked. The north wall still leaned. Nothing had been solved except the question of whether the shed had been empty. It had not. In the dark, with the heirlooms gathered close, and the walnut tree standing beyond the wall, Callie slept as a person sleeps when the work ahead is immense, but no longer nameless. The first snow came on December 6th, beginning as a thin white doubt over the walnut branches, and ending before dawn as 4 inches settled across the clearing. Callie woke to a different silence. The roof no longer ticked with rain, the ditch no longer spoke openly. Even the road beyond the trees seemed farther away, softened by the snow lying over ruts, stones, fallen husks, and the black mouths of burrows near the foundation. She stood in the doorway wearing both sweaters and watched the shed exhale faint smoke through the broken chimney. The small test fire behind her kept low and watched, while the world outside lay deliberate and waiting. The snow made the roof urgent. Leaks that had been tolerable under November rain became dangerous under freeze and thaw. Water entered through 5 known places and 1 new one above the back threshold, where it ran down a rafter gathered on a nail point and dropped with exact patience into a tin pan. By mid-morning the pan had a skim of ice. Callie stood beneath it and looked up until her neck ached. She read the roof chapter in the repair booklet 3 times. The first reading gave her names rafter, collar tie, sheathing, underlayment, flashing, drip edge, ridge. The second gave her order. The third gave her enough fear to proceed carefully. The drawings were plain, but plainness did not mean easy. A roof was a promise made in layers. Every mistake would become water. Every shortcut would wait for a storm and then speak. She measured the shed with clothesline, a pencil, and the back of an envelope from the county office. 24 feet by 30, with a steep pitch that made her understand why Warren had warned her against going up alone. The north slope carried the worst damage. A soft strip near the middle suggested rot beneath the shingles, and several cedar courses had lifted where old nails failed. The south slope was weathered but mostly faithful. She calculated square footage, added waste. Because the booklet insisted, a careful person counted breakage before it happened and wrote the list twice. Cedar shingles were beyond her reach for a full roof. Warren said the Historical Society might argue later, but water would not wait for a committee. He found bundles of asphalt shingles left from a school maintenance project, weathered at the wrapping but sound enough, and sold them at a price that was more mercy than arithmetic. She bought roofing felt, 2 rolls of it narrow enough to carry 1 at a time, galvanized roofing nails, 1 1/4 inch, a small tin of roof cement, a bent roll of flashing, chalk line, a utility knife. She paid a little from the cash found in the vat, only after writing the amount in Ruth's journal margin on a separate slip, not as spending but as borrowing from the future of the house. At the counter, Warren lifted a hatchet from beneath a stack of catalogues. It was a roofing hatchet, old and hand-balanced, the head dark with use, and the gauge notch worn bright along one edge. The handle had been replaced once and taped near the throat. He laid it on the counter between them. "My uncle carried this," he said. "Roofed barns from here to Medina before his knees quit." Callie did not touch it at first. "I cannot buy that. I did not price it." "Warren, you can bring it back when the roof stops leaking." His voice allowed no decoration. She wrapped her hand around the handle. It fit poorly, then better as her grip adjusted. Tools did not become familiar by wishing. They became familiar by use. The local elder arrived the next morning with a ladder tied to the roof of a blue pickup and a thermos under one arm. Warren had sent him, though neither man admitted to arrangements when asked. His name was Silas Mercer. He was 74, narrow as a rail, with a white beard trimmed close, and eyes the pale grey of winter water. He had roofed houses, barns, churches, and 2 covered bridges before a fall in 2008 left one ankle stiff in cold weather. He wore overalls under a canvas coat and carried a carpenter's pencil sharpened with a pocket knife. "I do not take pay," he said before Callie offered. "Then I cannot ask you to work." "You did not." "Warren did." He looked up at the roof. North side first. For 11 days they worked when the weather allowed and stopped when ice made pride dangerous. Silas had a teaching style that wasted no warmth on encouragement yet withheld no necessary knowledge. He showed her how to set the ladder at the proper angle, 1 foot out for every 4 feet up, and how to test the ground before trusting it. He made her climb and descend twice without carrying anything. 3 points, he said. "I know." "Know it again." On the roof he moved with an economy that made age irrelevant. He did not hurry, he did not pause for effect. He placed his boots where rafters carried weight and tapped questionable sheathing with the hatchet head. Listening, rotten boards answered softly. Soundboards answered with a clean knot. He made Callie hear the difference before he let her pull a nail. "That one's punky. I hear it. Show me." She tapped. The board gave its dull reply. They stripped the damaged north slope by sections, never opening more than they could cover before night. Old cedar shingles came away in curled fragments, their nails red with rust. Beneath them, The sheathing was better than she feared in some places and worse in others. One rafter near the centre had suffered where water had travelled along an old nail line. Silas showed her how to sister it. Cut a matching length, fit it tight alongside the weakened member, clamp if clamps existed, nail in staggered pairs, so the new wood carried what the old had grown too tired to hold. No shame in help, he said, tapping the sister rafter. Callie held the board while he set the first nails. After that, she made her do the next. Chalk line, he said when the felt began. She snapped it crooked the first time. He looked at the blue mark, then at her. Wynne did that? No. Sir. Pull it again. She did. The second line ran true enough. That nail's proud. I see it. Pull it. She pulled it. When she bent one, she said, again. When she rushed a course near sunset, she said, Ruth remembers hurry. That sentence stayed with her longer than praise would have. The work exhausted her in new places. Her thighs shook when she came down the ladder. Her shoulders burned from lifting bundles. The cold entered through gloves and settled in the joints of her fingers. Each night she ate whatever could be warmed near the hearth, then fell asleep before the fire had finished becoming coals. In the morning she rose sore and found that soreness could be sorted into kinds: warning, fatigue, and the honest ache of work done correctly. By mid-December, the north slope lay covered under new shingles, straight enough that even Silas stood in the clearing and gave a slow nod. They patched the south slope rather than replace it, sliding, flashing beneath the worst lifted places, and sealing 3 seams where water had been entering the back room. The roof was not fine. It would not appear in any magazine. It was patched, mixed, and visibly repaired by hands learning as they went. But when the next rain came, only 1 pan in the whole shed received water. Silas stood beneath the former leak above the threshold and listened. Good enough for winter, he said. From him, it sounded like a hymn. January did not arrive so much as close around the shed. The creek slowed under ice along its edges. The ruts in the lane hardened into uneven ridges that punished each trip to town. Mornings came with frost across the inside of the windows and a pale crust on the water jug if Callie left it too close to the door. She slept nearer the hearth now, not because the fire lasted through the night, but because the stones held a trace of warmth after flame had gone. Every evening she banked coals under ash the way the repair booklet described, and every morning she learned whether she had done it well. The chimney was the next honest problem. Its upper courses had spalled badly, the brick faces flaking away in thin red-orange scales where water had entered and frozen through years of neglect. Several mortar joints near the roofline had powdered to sand. When she touched them with the wire brush, the old lime fell out in soft grains and left black gaps between brick. The flue drew, but drawing was not the same as safety. A chimney could stand until it did not. Fire could forgive ignorance only briefly. Warren lent her a mason's line, a cold chisel, and a pointing trowel so worn at the tip it looked like an old spoon. He sold her a small bag of natural hydraulic lime, a sack of clean sharp sand, and enough fire clay for the inner repair. Silas came by once, looked up at the stack, and said the lower chimney would hold if she treated it with patience. Do not use Portland cement, Warren warned from behind the counter. Too hard. Old brick wants mortar that gives before brick does. He wrote the mix on brown paper. For exterior repointing, 1 part hydraulic lime, 2½ parts sharp sand, water added slowly until it held on the trowel without slumping. For firebox repair, 1 part fire clay, 1 part lime, 3 parts sand, mixed stiff. Used in thin joints, damp cured. Moisten the brick first, he said. Not dripping, just awake. For 3 weeks, Callie worked in temperatures that often stayed in the 20s. She chose the warmest hours of the day when the sun reached the south wall, though warm was a generous word. Some mornings began at 19 degrees and climbed only to 27. She learned to keep mortar from freezing by mixing small batches inside near the hearth, carrying them out in the bucket wrapped with an old towel and working faster than her hands wanted. She learned that masonry in winter was not romantic. It was timing, protection, and numb fingers. Every 15 minutes. Bare skin failed her. Gloves were too clumsy for some joints, especially where old mortar had to be raked out half an inch without damaging the brick edges. She would remove one glove, work with the chisel and brush until the fingers lost feeling, then tuck the hand under her arm and pace the clearing until pain returned in sparks. The first time it happened, she feared she had hurt herself. By the 5th day, she had a rhythm. Work warm. Work warm. Drink water before thirst, cover fresh joints with burlap. Do not trust sunlight alone. The old mortar came out reluctantly in places and too easily in others. Where rain had punished the west face, entire stretches crumbled under the joint rake. She cleaned until the gaps were sound, then misted the brick with water from a spray bottle Warren found in a box of garden supplies. She packed new mortar in layers, pressing firmly from the back of the joint outward, then struck it to shed water. Her first joints were clumsy, bulging like overfilled seams. She scraped them back and did them again. Flush enough, Silas said during one visit, looking over her work. That means not good. Means flush enough. He pointed to a vertical joint. Pack the head joints tighter. Water loves a straight road. She redid 3 courses after he left. The firebox required slower attention. The brick inside had cracked along one corner, and gaps near the smoke shelf allowed fine ash to sift into places it should not. She cleaned soot with a stiff brush, vacuumed what she could with a borrowed shop vac that coughed more than it pulled, then dampened the brick until it darkened. The fireclay mix felt silkier than exterior mortar, more reluctant to let go of the trowel. She pressed it into hairline cracks with a gloved finger, then tooled the joints with the rounded handle of the wire brush. At night, the shed smelled of lime, wet brick, ash, and wool drying near the hearth. The work changed the way she saw the chimney. It had been a broken vertical thing when she arrived, a danger with bricks. By late January, she knew its courses like the floor's creaks. She knew where an earlier mason had used a darker brick. She knew which side received weather first. She knew the place where some former hand had pressed a thumb into wet mortar and left a small oval print near the back, now preserved beneath soot and repair. She did not smooth over that mark. On January 29th, with the fresh joints cured enough and the day clear, Warren came after closing to inspect. He brought no ceremony, only a flashlight and a folded rag. He checked the firebox, the damper, the smoke shelf, and the repaired stack from the ground through binoculars because the roof still had frost on it. Small test, he said. Callie built it carefully. Paper. Twigs. 2 split sticks no thicker than her wrist. The match caught at once. Flame rose. Smoke gathered beneath the throat, hesitated, then drew upward cleanly. They watched for 10 minutes. No smoke slipped into the room. No sparks showed where they should not. The fire warmed the brick with a slow, steady colour, and the smell that came back was no longer bitter creosote but wood, ash, and the faint mineral scent of new mortar accepting heat. Warren nodded once. Chimneys breathing. Callie stood with her hands open toward the fire, feeling heat reach the bones of her fingers. Outside, the January dark pressed close against the windows. Inside, the smoke went clean. When the chimney no longer frightened her, the floors began to ask for attention. The front room planks were white pine, wide and uneven, some nearly 14 inches across, the kind of boards cut when trees still had time to grow large, and mills did not shave every measure into sameness. Their surfaces were grey with dirt, black near the hearth path, and furred in places where damp had lifted the grain. Hand-cut rosehead nails held them down, each head slightly different, each one catching light like a small dark star when the grime around it was cleared. Callie spent the first day on her knees with a putty knife, clearing the seams. She found cinders, mouse seeds, grit, a child's marble with a blue twist inside and a rusted straight pin. She did not remove every sign of age. The floor was not to become new. It was to become usable without losing its memory. Still, dirt had no sacred claim merely because it was old. She swept, scrubbed lightly with vinegar water, dried each section with rags, and waited 2 days for the boards to release their damp. Warren rented her a random orbit sander for $14 a day. He made her practice on a scrapboard behind the store before letting her carry it away. Keep it moving. Do not lean your weight into it. Let the grit cut. Start before touching down. Lift before stopping. He gave her a paper bag of used sanding discs and circled the grits with pencil. 80, 120, 220. 80 removes damage, he said. 120 forgives 80. 220 teaches your hand not to be greedy. The machine was heavier than it looked. Its vibration entered her wrists and climbed toward her elbows. The first pass with 80 grit raised dust so quickly that the room vanished in a pale storm despite the open windows and her mask. She worked in lanes overlapping each circle, moving with the grain where possible, careful around nail heads. When the paper tore on a raised nail, she stopped and set the nail by hand with Warren's punch, not too deep, just below the surface. Rose-head nails deserved to remain visible if they could. Under the grey, the pine returned slowly. Not golden at first, more like dry bone, then honey where old light had been buried. Darker paths remained where feet had crossed for generations between door, bench, hearth, and vat. She did not sand those away. They were the room's handwriting. The second pass with 120 grit quieted the roughness. The boards began to accept touch. She ran her palm across them and felt ridges, dents, tool marks from a plane long gone. Near the front window, a patch of deep scratches crossed 2 planks, perhaps from dragging a trunk or work table. Near the threshold, one board had been darkened by years of wet boots. She smoothed what would splinter and kept what would tell. The third pass, 220 grit, was less about appearance than listening. The sander hummed more lightly. Dust became finer, settling into her hair, lashes, cuffs, and the lines beside her mouth. At the end of the day, she stood outside and shook her coat until a pale cloud drifted from it into the cold air. For finish, Warren argued against polyurethane without fully arguing. Plastic coat on breathing boards, he said, and his face made the rest clear. He sold her tung oil cut with citrus solvent for the first coat and boiled linseed oil for later maintenance, writing proportions on the can with a marker, thin coats, flood, wait 20 minutes, wipe dry, no puddles, rags laid flat outside to cure because oil-soaked cloth could heat itself into fire. 48 hours before the next coat if the shed stayed above freezing, longer if the cold held. 3 coats, no shortcuts. The first coat disappeared into the wood so fast she almost doubted she had applied it. The boards drank greedily, darkening from pale honey to something deeper, warmer, closer to old amber. The second coat lingered long enough for her to move slowly with a folded rag, wiping in the direction of the grain. The third brought out colours she had not expected, dark honey near the window, brown sugar along the work path, mahogany shadows around old knots and nail heads. The room changed under her knees. It did not become elegant. The walls were still scarred. The windows still wore cracks and missing panes. The vat remained dark in the back room. But the floor, since only a surface she crossed, became a kept thing. It held light from the fire in long bands and returned it modestly. Then came the bad morning. It arrived without drama after 2 hard weeks and 1 night of poor sleep. Callie woke before dawn to sleet against the window boards and could not make her hands close around the kindling. The saucepan slipped, oats scattered across the floor she had just finished oiling. Her left boot was wet inside from a leak she had thought repaired. When she bent to gather the oats, 1 tear fell onto the pine, then another, leaving dark spots she wiped away with her sleeve before they could mark anything. She did not name what was happening. Naming would have required more strength than she had. She put on her coat, walked out behind the shed, and followed the ditch toward the marsh. The water there had opened in a few places despite the ice along its edges. Brown reeds leaned under sleet. The sky pressed low. A great blue heron stood in the shallows, tall and severe. Its body gathered into stillness so complete it seemed carved from the weather. Callie stopped several yards away and sat on a fallen log without asking anything of the bird or herself. For most of the day, she did no work. She watched the heron lift one foot and place it down without ripple. She watched sleet gather on the sleeves of her coat. She ate bread from her pocket and drank cold water. The shed waited behind her. The floor waited. The roof waited. Nothing collapsed because she had stopped for one day. Near dusk, the heron opened its wings and moved over the marsh with slow, deliberate power. Callie followed it with her eyes until it crossed the walnut line and disappeared. The next morning, she swept the oats from under the stove, warmed her hands, and returned to the floor. February entered through the windows because the windows were hardly windows at all. There were 8 openings in the shed. 3 had no glass, only boards nailed across them from some earlier attempt at discouragement. 4 held cracked panes that trembled when wind struck the walls. One in the front room facing east contained original wavy glass so old that morning light bent through it like water. Warren judged it late 18th century or close enough that replacing it would be an offence against both craft and common sense. "That one stays," he said. "It has a crack in the corner." "So do I." The sash were heavier than they looked, built of dense old wood and joined with pegs beneath layers of paint. Some cords had snapped, leaving weights trapped in their pockets. Others had been knotted with synthetic line that had stretched and failed. Paint sealed several sash shut, though not enough to keep out air. At night the wind found every weakness and made a thin singing at the edges. Callie began by numbering each sash with painter's tape, then drawing a crude window map in the repair booklet. North wall 2 openings, both boarded, 1 frame sound, 1 sill soft. East front the wavy glass window, cracked corner, cords gone. South wall 3 windows, 2 cracked, 1 missing lower pane. West back 2 openings, 1 with no glass, 1 with a sash so swollen it would not move. She removed stops carefully with a thin pry bar marking each piece and saving every nail that would come free without splitting the wood. Old paint flaked in stiff curls. She wore the mask because lead lived in old trim like a bad memory, invisible until disturbed. Warren had given her a jar labelled wet scrape only and repeated the words until she repeated them back. No dry sanding paint. No dry sanding paint. She laid the sash across padded boards in the front room and worked one at a time. The broken glass came out slowly. First she softened old glazing putty with the careful heat of a hairdryer borrowed from Joris, never hot enough to crack nearby panes, just warm enough to persuade. Then she lifted brittle putty with a glazing knife, removed points with needle nose pliers, and eased each shard free. The sound of glass leaving its seat after decades was delicate and unpleasant, like ice breaking under a small foot. Warren supplied salvaged panes from storm windows removed behind the hardware store. They were not perfect. Some had bubbles, scratches, or a faint green edge that suited the shed better than flawless glass would have. She measured twice, cut once under Warren's supervision on the back counter, and learned that glass demanded confidence without force. Score with steady pressure. Lift, snap. Do not apologize to the sheet. For bedding the panes, she used DAP 33 glazing putty warmed in her hands until it softened. Warren showed her the motion, roll a thin rope, press it into the rabbet, set the glass gently, install points, then tool the outer bevel in one continuous pull if possible. Her first bevel looked chewed. She scraped it away and tried again. The second was better. By the 4th window, her wrist understood how the knife should angle. Putty tells on hurry, Warren said. Everything did. The sash cords required another lesson. Each weight pocket opened behind a narrow panel in the jamb, and inside each one lay the iron counterweight, cold and dusty, waiting at the bottom like a dropped clock pendulum. She bought 1/4-inch cotton sash cord, not nylon, because Warren insisted old pulleys preferred honest fibre. Thread the cord over the pulley, tie a figure-8 knot through the counterweight eye. Test the drop before closing the pocket. Cut the cord with allowance, not optimism. Knot the sash end, seat it properly, and lift. The first repaired sash rose too fast and slammed. Warren. who had come by carrying a paper sack from Doris, looked at it and said, "Try again." She did. By the fifth window, the lift was smooth enough to make her smile in spite of herself. A working sash had a dignity all its own. It invited air without surrendering to weather. It made a room negotiable. The original wavy glass window she treated last among the front ones, and most carefully, she left the cracked corner because the pane held and the crack did not travel. She cleaned it with vinegar and newspaper until old grime released in brown streaks. When morning light came through afterward, it entered bent and softened, laying the workbench in a wavering brightness that looked almost like water over stone. The last window was the west one near the back room. Its lower rail had swelled, and one muntin had loosened at the joint. She repaired it with hide glue Warren found in a drawer and clamped it overnight with padded scraps so the old wood would not bruise. The next day, snow began falling again, fine and dry, while she set the final pane. Her hands were sore from kneading putty. The room smelled of linseed, cold glass, lime, and wood smoke, as she tooled the last bevel. A chickadee landed on the walnut branch outside. It was close enough that she could see the quick black cap of its head, the pale breast, the bead-bright eye turning toward the movement of her hand. The bird held there through 3 careful pulls of the glazing knife, weightless on the thin branch, then flicked away into the grey afternoon. Callie finished the line, wiped her knife on a rag, and looked through the new glass. For the first time since she had arrived, the shed held the weather outside rather than inside. Wind still found seams, cold still entered under the door, but the windows stood in their frames, a paired, named, and working. By late February, the walls began to show what winter had hidden. The shed had always been more than boards and stone. Beneath the soot, beneath the years of damp and smoke, the front room still held its original plaster in broad uneven fields, horsehair plaster pressed over hand-split oak lath. In places the surface had hardened to a soft grey-white marked by trowel lines and old nail holes. Near the chimney, 3 patches had failed completely. The plaster had bellied away from the lath and cracked open in ragged islands, exposing the thin wooden strips beneath, each one split by hand and nailed with patience. Callie touched the exposed lath with 2 fingers. It was dry where it mattered, darkened from age but not rotten. The keys of the plaster, those little squeezed ridges behind the lath that held the wall together, had broken where water had run down from the damaged chimney before the repairs. The wall did not need replacing. It needed to be taught to hold again. Warren brought out a paper sack from the back of the hardware store, folded twice and soft at the corners. "My father bought this in the 50s, he said. "Horsehair. Clean enough. Smells like a barn. But plaster does not mind." The hair came in dark, springy clumps. Callie mixed it into lime mortar in small batches, learning the strange patience of plaster, which seemed neither solid nor liquid, until the trowel told the truth. The recipe was written on a scrap tucked into the repair booklet. Lime putty, clean sand, chopped horsehair, water added sparingly. For the deeper repair, she mixed stiff. For the finish, finer and smoother. She dampened the lath before beginning. Not soak, awake. The scratch coat went first, pressed hard through the gaps so it pushed behind the lath and formed new keys. She scored the wet surface with the notched edge of the trowel shallow lines to give the next coat something to grip. It looked rough when finished, almost wounded, but the booklet said roughness had purpose. She kept it damp for 2 days, misting morning and evening, shielding it from hard fire heat with a piece of tin leaned near the hearth. The brown coat followed, 3/8 of an inch thick, built out to meet the old wall without swelling beyond it. She worked slowly, pulling the trowel upward, levelling with a straight board Warren called a derby, though it was only a saved length of pine. The patch resisted at the edges. New plaster and old wall did not marry quickly. She feathered the seams with a wet brush, stepped back, saw a hump, scraped it down, tried again. Then she let it cure 72 hours, though impatience made every hour long. The finished coat was thin, 1/8 of an inch, fine as cream compared with the others. It required a gentler hand, Too much pressure dragged sand, too little left ridges. She moved in arcs, then long strokes, smoothing but not erasing the life of the surface. The repaired places remained visible if the light crossed them sideways. That seemed right. A healed wall did not need to pretend it had never opened. When the last patch had firmed under her palm, Callie stood in the front room and looked at the chimney wall, the window light, the floor with its honeyed boards, the mended sash, the line where new plaster met old. These patches will hold another 100 years. She did not say it aloud. The words came and settled inside her like a measurement. Doris at Mercy Lunch never called what she did charity. That would have made it too formal, and Doris disliked anything that required a person to stand on one side of a counter receiving what could not be repaid. She was a broad woman in her late 50s with short brown hair going silver at the temples and forearms strong from lifting stock pots. Her diner opened at 5:30 each morning for men who needed coffee before roofing, roadwork, towing, or driving delivery trucks along the interstate. By 7, the front window steamed from the griddle, and the whole place smelled of onions, coffee, toast, bacon, and floor cleaner. The first paper bag appeared on Callie's doorstep after the chimney test, folded neatly at the top, and weighted with a can of beans so the wind would not take it. Inside were 2 heel ends of bread, a container of soup, 3 bruised apples, and a note written on the back of an order ticket. Too much made. Do not make me throw it away. Callie carried the empty container back the next day, washed clean. I can pay something, she said. Doris reached for a coffee pot and filled a mug for a man at the counter, in candles when the shop reopens. It is not a shop, not with that tone. Then she moved away before gratitude could become heavy. After that, the paper bags came without schedule. Some held soup, some held biscuits too hard for customers and perfect for soaking. Some held coffee grounds for the compost Callie had not yet built. Once during a week of sleet, Doris left a pair of wool socks rolled tight with a rubber band and claimed they had been abandoned under a booth. Caleb arrived with the first clear Saturday in March, though snow still lay in the shaded ditch. He was 15, maybe 16, long-limbed and narrow-shouldered, riding a red Schwinn bicycle with one fender bent and a milk crate wired to the back. A splitting maul rode across the handlebars in a way that made Callie step quickly toward him, afraid he would lose a finger before reaching the clearing. He stopped near the walnut tree and put one boot down. My mother said you need wood split. Callie looked at the maul, then at him. Who is your mother? Mrs. Bell? At the post office. The name placed him. The woman with the round glasses who had helped Callie set up general delivery, then later held aside county mail instead of returning it when storms delayed the walk into town. I cannot pay much, he shrugged. My mother said. About your grandfather. The sentence was unfinished, but it did not need finishing. Elias had taught someone something, fixed something, shown up somewhere with a bundle wrapped in brown paper. The town seemed to contain little buried lines of him, each one surfacing only when Callie had stopped expecting them. Caleb split wood badly at first. He struck too hard, missed the grain, buried the maul in the chopping block, and tried to free it by twisting. Callie corrected him the way Silas corrected her, without making humiliation out of instruction. Read the split. He frowned at the log. It does not have words, not those kind. By noon, she had learned to set the round steady, lift less, aim better, and let the weight of the maul do what his shoulders could not. When she offered him money, she shook his head before she finished. My mother said no. Your mother seems to say a lot. Yes, ma'am. He came again the next week and the week after. Sometimes he split, sometimes he carried water, sometimes he sat on the step and asked about the vat, the tools, the strange thin lights that were not candles. Callie answered what she knew and admitted what she did not. He listened with the grave attention of a young person not yet willing to show how much he cares. Reverend Boyd passed every morning at almost the same hour. He was the pastor of the storefront church near the laundromat. A tall man in a black overcoat shiny at the elbows, with a brimmed hat he tipped whenever he reached the clearing. His walk took him down Canal Road, past the old mill race, and back toward town before breakfast. The first time Callie saw him, she was carrying ash behind the shed, and nearly dropped the bucket when he appeared between the walnut trees. "'S'morning," he said. "'S'morning?" He did not ask to come in. He did not ask what she was doing there, or whether she had found Jesus. Shelter. Employment. Saw sense. He tipped his hat, paused beside the lane, and spoke 4 words so quietly they could have belonged to the wind. "Lord, keep this house." Then he walked on. After that he did the same most mornings, tip of the hat. 4 words, no sermon left on the step, no advice folded into concern. In March, when mud softened the lane, he walked around the worst of it without complaint. In April rain he carried an umbrella with 2 ribs broken and still paused to offer the same passing prayer. The words became part of the place's daily order, like smoke rising, water warming, and the repaired sash lifting to admit air. Callie did not know whether she believed in blessings the way churches taught them, but she began to understand repetition. A thing said carefully, day after day, could wear a path through doubt without arguing with it. The cellar waited until February 11th because Callie could not bear one more dark place before then. The door to it lay beneath a trap in the back room, half hidden behind the vat and a stack of warped boards she had not yet sorted. She had noticed the iron ring weeks earlier, brushed dust from it, and then covered it again with an empty sack. Roof first, chimney next, floors, windows, plaster. Each task had stood between her and the ground below, and she had accepted the order without shame. On the morning she finally lifted the trap. Cold air rose from beneath, like breath from a stone jar. 7 granite steps descended into darkness, each one worn slightly hollow in the center. She tied a rope to the iron ring above, set the flashlight between her teeth for the first steps, then stopped and found a better way, hanging the light from a nail with picture wire so both hands could remain free. The walls were fieldstone, dry-laid in some places, mortared in others, with roots no thicker than thread entering near the corners. The floor measured roughly 12 by 15 feet, made of packed earth and flat stones, damp but not flooded. It smelled of minerals, old apples, and time without air. She waited at the bottom until her eyes adjusted. There were shelves along one wall, collapsed under the weight of empty jars. A barrel hoop lay rusted near the far corner. 2 stoneware crocks stood intact, one cracked lid still seated. She lifted it and found nothing but dust and a spider's delicate ruin. Along the north wall, someone had stacked broken brick, perhaps saved from an earlier chimney repair. In the center of the cellar floor lay a single dressed granite slab. It did not belong to the rest. The slab was rectangular, about 3 feet long and 2 feet wide, set flush with the surrounding stone. Its surface had been smoothed by a mason's hand, and near one end a craft mark had been carved, a rush stem crossed with a dipping hook, the lines simple but certain. Dust filled the grooves. Callie knelt and cleaned them with a dry brush. The slab had the gravity of a sentence not yet read. She did not lift it. Every part of her that had learned caution, from Elias, from Warren, from roofs and mortar and cold nights, understood that some discoveries asked for a stronger season. A dressed stone in the center of a cellar might cover a drain, a pit, a grave of tools, or only the vanity of a maker wanting to leave a sign. It would wait. She had learned by now that waiting was not refusal. She rose, turned toward the stairs, and saw something wedged beneath the 3rd step from the bottom. At first she mistook it for a block of fallen wood. Then the light caught a straight edge. She climbed 2 steps and worked her fingers under the tread, drawing out a small oak box packed with dust and cobweb. It was no bigger than a Bible, made with dovetailed corners and a brass latch gone green. The lid stuck, then opened with a dry little sigh. Inside lay a brass key and a photograph. The key was heavy for its size, the bow shaped like the same crossed symbol carved into the granite slab, rush stem and dipping hook, simplified until it became almost a flower. Its shaft was plain. Its bit, however, had 3 narrow cuts of unequal depth. Not a common key. Not for any lock she had yet seen. She set it on her palm and felt its cold weight. The photograph was a tintype dark and mirrored when tilted, protected by a folded piece of cloth. It showed a young woman standing in front of the shed in summer. The building behind her was whole then. The roof straight, the sign fresh enough to read. Rush bundles hung near the open doorway. The woman held a stripping knife in one hand and a bundle of prepared rush in the other. She wore a long skirt, a white blouse, and an expression so direct that Callie stopped breathing for a moment. The face was not hers exactly, yet it was close enough to unsettle the air. The same cheek shape, the same steady mouth, the same eyes that seemed to watch before trusting. A face carried forward through time without permission. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written, Miriam Vale, daughter of Anson, age 25, summer of 1903. Callie sat on the cellar step with the box open beside her. Miriam had been 25, Ruth's generation, perhaps a sister, cousin, helper, keeper of another branch of the same patient line. The photograph did not explain itself. It only placed a young woman before the very shed Callie now inhabited, holding a tool of the trade as if to say that work had once belonged fully to her hands. Callie carried the box upstairs. She cleaned the key with a dry cloth, no polish, not wanting to erase what age had placed there. She set the tintype inside the shoebox with the letter, but kept the key apart. It went on the mantel above the hearth, where firelight could reach it in the evenings. For days afterward she glanced at it whenever wind struck the windows. She did not yet know what it opened. The slow work keeps what hurry throws away. By March, winter began retreating in pieces. Snow withdrew first from the south side of the shed, then from the lane, then from the low field beyond the walnut trees where the sun reached longest. What remained turned grey, shrank and vanished into the ground by afternoon, leaving mud glossy in the ruts. The creek became loud with snow melt, pushing under broken ice, carrying leaves, twigs, foam, and the pale husks of walnut shells. At night it could be heard through the repaired windows, no longer muffled by snow, but speaking with the rough confidence of water freed from holding still. Walnut catkins appeared like small green tassels along the branches. Callie opened the east sash on a mild afternoon and let air move through the front room. It smelled of thawed earth, oil, lime, smoke, and the faint sweetness of wood warming after months of cold. Dust lifted and travelled in the light. The floor no longer froze her knees when she knelt. The plaster patches cured fully, paling into the wall. The chimney drew without complaint. The roof gave no new leaks through 2 days of steady rain. People in town began to speak of the shed differently. Not warmly, not all at once, but with altered nouns. It was no longer that condemned place. Not always. Sometimes at Mercy lunch someone said the Canal Road building. Warren called it the Rowe shed when ordering supplies. Caleb called it the shop before correcting himself, then stopped correcting himself by April. Reverend Boyd kept his 4-word prayer unchanged. Callie did not begin the craft that spring. The decision surprised her only because others assumed discovery would become action quickly. Warren asked whether she needed tallow. Doris asked whether candles would be ready by summer, then corrected herself when Callie explained again Caleb wanted to see a rush split. Even Mrs. Klein, in a note attached to a county inspection form, wrote that historic demonstration use might be possible after future compliance. Callie read Ruth's instructions again and knew the answer was no. The rushes would not be cut until late summer after dry days. Her hands still needed practice before touching good material. The shed needed water made safer, the outhouse rebuilt or replaced, the north wall braced properly, the cellar understood. Beginning too early would be another kind of damage, prettier than neglect but damage all the same. She took 1 silver coin from the cash, a worn quarter dated 1943, and wrote its description in the account page she had begun for herself. With that coin converted through ordinary money at Warren's counter, she ordered a small bundle of practice rush and a pound of clean tallow from a historical supplier in Pennsylvania. When it arrived wrapped in brown paper, she did not open it at once. She set it on the bench beside the bone-handled stripper, and let the room grow used to it. On April evenings, after the day's repair work, she practiced on poor stems Caleb cut from a drainage ditch, learning again how easily pith tore when the knife grew impatient. She ruined more than she kept. She hung the failed strips on a nail near the door, as Elias once had done for her. Caleb saw them and asked why she saved mistakes, so I do not have to make the same one twice. He accepted that. The house was patient. So was she. 2 winters later. In December of 2024, Callie finished the first Rushlight she was willing to wrap for another person. Snow lay outside again, though not deeply, only enough to whiten the ruts and gather along the north side of the walnut trunks. The shed, no longer condemned, stood with its patched roof, mended chimney, repaired windows, braced north wall, and a narrow gravel path Caleb had helped lay from the lane to the door. The sign above the entrance had been cleaned but not repainted. Its ghost letters remained, and beneath them Callie had hung a small card in the window written by hand. Rushlights by order. Repair and small work. Please ask with patience. The first completed piece was not grand. It was a single rushlight, 13 inches long, stripped cleanly, dried without brittleness, dipped twice in tallow mixed with beeswax at the ratio Ruth had written, then rested on the rack until its surface dulled to a soft satin finish. It burned evenly in the test holder without spitting, without heavy smoke, offering a modest flame for the length of an ordinary conversation. Callie watched it burn beside the journal, taking notes in pencil the way a craftsperson must when memory alone would flatter the hand. Batch 1. Winter trial. Good pith. Bath held at 142 degrees. Second dip perhaps too slow. Flame steady. She wrote the words carefully. Then she wrapped the remaining lights from that batch in brown paper and tied them with twine from a coffee can. Warren had given her because he said the shed looked wrong without one. On the first wrapper, she printed the date, the length, the material, and the burn test. No decoration. No false age. Honest work did not need costume. The interior had become spare, warm, and exact. The front room held the workbench beneath the east window, its surface scrubbed, oiled, and marked already by use. Drying racks folded against the wall when empty and swung out when needed, their dowels smoothed and replaced only where necessary. The floor shone softly where feet passed, darker along the old paths, brighter near the windows. The plaster patches had settled into the wall like old cloth mended by a careful seamstress. A small iron stove, approved by inspection after much paperwork and Warren's measuring, sat where the hearth could share its draught. The original fireplace remained cleaned and honoured, used only for small fires. The back room held the vat, no longer a mystery, but not ordinary either. Callie had cleaned the iron slowly, removing hardened residue without polishing away its age. The cedar disc remained fitted beside it on a shelf, its wire holes visible. The hidden cash was no longer hidden beneath tallow, but most of it had been returned to a sealed metal box inside the vat cavity, documented, wrapped, and left in trust. The journal lived in a drawer built beneath the workbench, raised above damp, wrapped in cloth, read often, and handled cleanly. Ruth's letter remained folded along its original creases. The brass key stayed on the mantel for almost a year before it found its lock. It happened after a storm in late summer loosened a dead limb from the old walnut. Caleb, taller by then and more careful with tools, came to help cut and stack the fallen wood. As they worked, he noticed that the scar around the horseshoe had changed. A plate of bark had lifted where the limb tore away, exposing a small brass edge set into the trunk beneath the grown wood. Callie cleaned it with the corner of her sleeve. It was a brass plate, green with age, fitted into the living tree behind the place where the horseshoe had nearly disappeared. At its centre was a keyhole so narrow that for several seconds she did not breathe. She went inside, took the brass key from the mantel, and returned with Caleb standing several feet away, silent for once. The key entered reluctantly. She did not force it. She worked it with a touch of oil, and the patience learned from rusted dampers, swollen sash, and old mortar. At last the bit seated, the key turned 1/4 turn with a sound no louder than a beetle moving under bark. A concealed brass door no larger than a book loosened within the trunk. Inside was a cavity lined with tin. The first thing she removed was a folded flag. It was small, cotton, with 48 stars, the edges browned but intact, folded into a triangle that had flattened over time. Behind it lay a note wrapped in waxed cloth. The handwriting differed from Ruth's, solder and more slanted, but the same deliberate care lived in it. August 12th, 1919. For Samuel's mother, should grief require a place beyond the house? This flag was sent after the service at Musargon, where our Samuel fell in the last hard season of the war. I, Miriam Vale Hart, place it here because Ruth cannot look upon it and cannot part with it. The tree will keep what the room cannot bear. If another woman finds it in another year, remember that the nation speaks in flags, but mothers hear only footsteps that do not return. Let no one sell this. Let no one display it for pride. Take it out only to honour him. Then fold it again. MVH. Callie stood beneath the walnut with the flag in both hands. Caleb removed his cap. The summer leaves moved overhead, making and unmaking light across the bark. The horseshoe, the brass plate, the hidden cavity, the note from Miriam, the face in the tintype, the medal marked 1918, Ruth's letter, the journal, the old craft mark on the cellar slab, all joined without fully explaining themselves. Not every mystery becomes an answer. Some become duty. The military medal was honoured on November 11th, 224. Callie took it to Lakeview Cemetery in Cleveland, where Warren said members of Samuel's extended family had stones in one of the older sections, though no body had returned from France for the name on the medal. The day was cold and clean, the trees mostly bare, the grass damp underfoot. She carried the medal wrapped in tissue, the small 48-star flag folded in a cloth sleeve, and a rushlight from her first successful winter batch. At 11 in the morning, when the cemetery road had gone still between passing cars, she stood near a family marker whose dates matched the journal and read Samuel's name aloud once. Reverend Boyd had come with her, not to preside, only to stand. Warren stood on her other side with his hat in both hands. Caleb waited behind them, shifting his weight in the cold. They did not make a spectacle. Callie placed the medal on the stone for the length of 1 minute, then lifted it again. She lit the rushlight in a small shielded holder, and let it burn until the flame steadied. The smoke rose pale and straight in the cold air. Then she folded everything away, as Miriam had instructed, and carried it home. Of the money in the vat, very little was spent. 3 silver coins and 2 worn bills were converted over time, each one recorded in Callie's account with date, reason, and replacement plan. One helped buy roofing material before winter took the north slope. One paid for the first chimney inspection fee the county required. One ordered practice rush. One purchased archival sleeves for the journal and photographs. One helped cover the permit cost when the inspector finally agreed that restoration, not demolition, was underway. The rest remained sealed for the next one. That phrase had come to her gradually. Not the next owner in a legal sense only, and not necessarily blood. The next one might be someone like herself, arriving with nothing but a need for shelter and a hand trained by loss to notice what others missed. Or perhaps the next one would be Caleb in 50 years, opening the journal with his older fingers, or a woman not yet born, standing in the back room with rain on her coat and no clear road behind her. Callie placed the money in archival sleeves and labelled what she could without cleaning away history. Coins stayed in cloth bags, bills lay flat between acid-free paper. The medal and flag were stored separately, never in the vat again, because duty had changed their place. The sealed box went beneath the cedar false bottom, not hidden by deception now, but kept by intention. On top of it she placed a new note listing what had been found, what had been used, and why. Possession says spend. Inheritance asks keep. The shop reopened so quietly that even the word reopened seemed too large at first. It began with an index card on the corkboard inside Mercy Lunch, pinned beside piano lessons, firewood, a lost orange cat, and a church supper notice. Canal road lights, hand-dipped domestic lights. Historical craft. Repair of holders. Small orders by patients only. Inquire by mail or at Mercy Lunch. Doris stood behind the counter and pretended not to watch the first person read it. Orders came slowly. A woman from Palmer wanted 4 for a Christmas Eve table because her grandmother had spoken of them. A history teacher ordered 6 for a classroom demonstration after Callie made him promise not to let students treat flame as a toy. A museum volunteer asked for a dozen and received a 3-page note on safe display because Callie had become exact where care required it. Reverend Boyd ordered 2 each Advent and burned 1 at the storefront church during a service where no one advertised the gesture. By the end of that winter, the mailing list held 43 names. Callie kept them in a ledger Warren had found at an estate sale, its pages ruled in blue. She wrote each name carefully along with order dates, materials, burn tests and payment. When people sent too much, she credited the difference toward future repair. When people sent notes, she tucked them into a folder labeled Kinesis, a title Doris mocked gently until Collie showed her that it already contained the first diner order ticket with too much made written across the back. Caleb returned with the sign on a Sunday afternoon in late winter. He was taller than when he first came, his shoulders broader from work, his red Schwinn replaced by an old pickup that coughed when shut off. In the bed lay a wooden sign wrapped in a quilt. He refused help carrying it until the awkwardness of the length forced him to accept one end. Together they brought it to the front of the shed and leaned it against the wall beneath the original faded board. The new sign was white oak, hand-carved, the letters deep enough to hold shadow. Callie read it once, then again. Plural, she said. Caleb looked at the ground, then at the sign. Seemed right. You made this? My shop teacher let me stay after. Warren sharpened the chisels. The ampersand had been carved with unusual care. Its curve held something both practical and tender, joining what had been separated by years, Vale and Rowe, Ruth and Miriam, Elias and Callie, women and work, past and whatever hands came after. I cannot pay you what this is worth. Caleb shrugged, but his ears reddened. My mother said no. Your mother has built a whole economy. Yes, ma'am. They hung the sign beneath the older one, not replacing it. The old board remained faded and stubborn, bearing witness to what had nearly been lost. The new one stood below it in clean oak, not loud, not ornate, simply legible from the lane. Doris drove out to see it and brought coffee in a thermos. Warren stood with his pencil behind his ear and adjusted the left chain by one link. Reverend Boyd arrived on his morning walk, though it was afternoon, tipped his hat, and spoke the same 4 words he always spoke. Lord, keep this house. No one clapped. No photograph was taken. The sign moved slightly in the winter air, then settled. That night, Callie began her own letter. She sat at the workbench under the east window, with the brass key beside the ink bottle. Ruth's letter to her left, Elias's 3 rushlights now reduced to 2 unburned ones, and the journal open to a blank page she had sewn into the back with linen thread. Outside snow had begun again, light enough to soften the path but not cover it. Inside the stove held steady, the chimney drew clean, and the finished rushlights lay wrapped in brown paper on the rack. She wrote the first words without changing them. My dear one, whoever you are. Then she stopped, not because she had nothing to say, but because the opening had weight. Ruth had written from illness, after endings. Callie wrote from the middle of rebuilding, with no certainty that the work would last beyond her hands. That made the letter more necessary, not less. She began again beneath the first line. If you have found this, then the house has outweighted me, or I have grown old enough to understand what I was given. I came here with no bed, no roof worth trusting, and almost no money. I did not come brave. I came because the notice used a word my grandfather had once placed in my hands. She paused, dipped the pen, and listened to the room. The workbench held its ordinary clutter, wick cotton, scissors, brown paper, a thermometer, a chipped mug of cooled tea, a list of orders, a broken rush saved for teaching. The vat stood in the back room with its secret no longer secret to her. The cellar slab waited still, craft mark cleaned but not lifted. That was for another season or another life. Not every door needed opening because one possessed the key to patience. She wrote about Warren's account ledger, Doris's paper bags, Caleb's first ruined split, Mrs. Klein's brass stamp, the librarian's free photocopy, the janitor who had let sleep remain undisturbed. She wrote that houses are rebuilt by materials and by mercies, and that the second kind often arrives without invoice. She wrote the temperatures Ruth had recorded and the corrections she had learned through failure. She wrote that rushwork must not be made quaint. It had lit hunger, birth, prayer, fever, grief, and winter rooms. It deserved accuracy. Near midnight, she set the pen down and flexed her hand. The letter was not finished. It might take years. That seemed proper. The Rushlight dipping shed waits. It has always waited. Not idly, not emptily. It waits the way a field waits under snow, the way a hand-worn tool waits on a peg, the way instructions wait inside a folded letter, until someone with need enough and care enough opens them. It waits with repaired windows and patched plaster, with a roof that remembers 11 hard days in December, with a chimney that sends smoke clean into the cold, with a walnut tree holding iron, brass, flag, and weather in its living wood. In the county office, Mrs. Klein still kept the soft dollar from the original bid clipped to its receipt slip. It had been moved from the active file to a narrow drawer beside surplus records and survey maps, where small transactions went when they no longer required attention. The bill was worn at the fold, ordinary in every way except that a parcel number had been written beside it, and a clerk who knew the difference between value and price had chosen not to forget. Sometimes when new staff asked why a condemned shed sold for so little, Mrs. Klein opened the drawer, touched the slip, and told them the truth in her exact county voice, because no one else knew what it was worth.